Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku became the world's #1 villain? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Tamura just stands there and looks. Izuku does the same thing. They both maintain their position while maintaining eye contact. Nobody moves, and no one speaks. There is only the gloomy darkness that accompanies the bar's silence. Eventually, though, Tamura hums. But instead of doing anything, he just keeps staring, as though thinking about something. Izuku finally crosses his arms and asks, "What?" At last, Tamura's expression changes and he smirks. "I might have misjudged you." Izuku gives a snort. Really? He's waving something around his ear and says, "Tell me. This is something that you go through every day. You know." Izuku gives a shrug. "In a way. I suppose that this is just the worst it's been. Probably has to do with the fact that I actually acted back for once." Tamura doesn't seem convinced. "You, engaging in a counterstrike, I don't believe you." Izuku lets out a sigh at how easily his bluff was discovered. "Okay, fine. So maybe I just insulted him." With a hint of excitement, Tamura exclaims, "And he did that to you?" Izuku knows that Tamura's excitement is normal by now, so he doesn't let it affect him. "He did," answers Izuku. "He's just like that." Then, Tamura murmurs, "Must have some piss poor mini ego." Izuku laughs. "That much I can agree on," she says. To which Tamura nods, "Don't care. But, tell me, you essentially got your father killed because of your quirk. And your mother hates you with passion now because of it. And you're bullied at school every day because all the other kids don't like you for being different. Yeah." A brief pause occurs. "If you leave out a few details, sure," Izuku scoffs after a while. "So you've actually done your homework. Call me surprised. And what? Is that supposed to impress me? Unnerve me?" he asks, leaning back in his seat and keeping his gaze fixed on Tamura's form. As Tamura puts it, "Just getting some facts straight, wanted to hear it straight from you. What difference does it even make? Your eyes?" In response, Izuku narrows the organs in question. "And what about them?" Tamura shows his fangs. "I can see the anger hidden there. The unbridled rage, the utter hatred, the want for things to just change. The desire to dismantle society to its roots, to destroy it." It is a moment before Izuku can answer. Where's all of this coming from, exactly? A sudden speech? Or would it be more like a rally for one person? Point is, not like you at all. "No, it isn't," acknowledges Tamura. "But you've caught my attention finally. Only took you a few years, but I'll give you credit for holding out for so long." Izuku continues, "Okay. What's the point of all this? Because right now I find the way you're acting disorienting. As is, I find it more likely that you're someone with a shape-shifting quirk rather than the real Tamura." Tamura gives an eye roll. "I just think that you're stupid." Izuku bends over. "Excuse me, you have a quirk that's more than you show. Why hide that fact? I doubt that you'd understand. Try me." Izuku lets out a sigh. He responds, "It's for the benefit of others, people in similar situations as me. If I didn't take the brunt of the abuse then." Tamura shakes his head, saying, "Like I said, stupid. Honestly. What have they done for you? Those people that you're protecting out of the kindness of your heart? Huh, jack shit I bet. And like I said, you wouldn't understand, but that doesn't." "Well fuck him, then," yells Tamura. "Watch out for yourself. They've done nothing for you. Why should you care about them? Ignoring people in trouble isn't something that her." "Unbelievable," says Tamura. "You still want to be a fucking hero despite all that? Despite knowing what heroes are really like? What people are like?" "And what if I do?" Tamura almost starts to tear out his hair, but he just manages to stop himself. "I can't believe that Sensei wants your goody two-shoes ass here." Izuku laughs. "Nothing that you can do about now, is there?" Tamura's head tilts. He holds the pose for a short while. Then his annoyance goes away, and he smiles smugly. "Of course there is. Really now. And what's that? If you're going to be sticking around, you need to work on some things. Like fighting. As of right now, I doubt that you'd last 1 second against those pathetic bullies of yours." "Really now? And what is it that you think I'm doing with Kurogiri then?" "Special techniques, combo moves, fancy stuff that appeases wise-ass pretentious people like you," Tamura goes on to describe. "But you're still slacking on other things, like increasing your stats. Things like your agility." Izuku purposefully ignores the former portion of Tamura's spiel and adopts a blank expression. My agility. No point working on strength or constitution, too scrawny and weak. When Izuku hears that, he pushes out of his seat. Hey. Tamura goes on, you don't need to work on that because your intelligence seems pretty high. Wisdom is questionable, but fine, and that's all. Izuku furrows his brow in contemplation. I'm not exactly experienced with your vocabulary, but aren't you forgetting something? Tamura growls out loud. Who the hell cares about talking skill? You need to crush your enemies, not do some talk no jutsu bullshit. After that outburst, Izuku, very assiduously, backs off. He clears his throat. All right. What the heck? Are you implying that you know the answers to that? I do, replies Tamura rather coolly, his anger gone. Let me show you. He turns and points to follow. Tamura motions for Izuku to stay, and Izuku jumps out of his seat to do so. They don't move much, just to a more open area of the bar, and after a few seconds, they are facing each other down. Tamura starts, let's see. I want you to beat me. Izuku asks, raising an eyebrow, like, in a fight? In a fucking fight, yes. I win if I get into a position where I can tear your face off, Tamura says, shaking his head and beginning to put on some gloves before continuing. I'll also give you a handicap because this is your first time. You can use your quirk. However, nothing else. No items, power-ups, or shit. Really a handicap? Disregarding the latter requirements, Izuku asks, what precisely qualifies as a power-up in this context? Trigger? What objects? The chairs? My shoes? With a sly smile, Tamura positions himself ready and says, you'll need it. All right, Izuku nods, imitating Tamura. Start. Begin. Izuku's ears listen for movements in Tamura's arms, watching them move back and forth as he dashes forward, his feet hammering against the bar's wooden floorboards, his footsteps clearly audible to Izuku with his peculiarity, clomping loudly and sloppily along. Izuku, as usual, hears it before he sees it as Tamura approaches, his left hand rising upwards in time with his movement, preparing to strike, and judging by its trajectory, it is aiming right for Izuku's gut. Izuku inhales. He makes the appropriate motions to avoid. Tamura moves suddenly, much faster than before, and then the older boy is on top of him, swerving around Izuku and heading for his exposed butt. Izuku can hardly turn and block the blow, and the brutality and force of it nearly knock him back to the ground. Izuku backs off, hoping to get out of Tamura's reach, but that doesn't really help because Tamura keeps getting closer and closer, faster than Izuku can keep up with. After one ill-advised move, Izuku discovers that Tamura's gloved hand is tightly gripping his skin over his face. And then, boom! You're out of the game. As he backs up, Izuku swats Tamura's hand away and turns to face the boy, who is grinning broadly. You can fight, says Tamura, and Kurogiri can confirm it. I can be heard, but you can't respond quickly enough to take action. Your bullies will experience the same thing. So, take care of that. That speed, it's not a byproduct of your quirk, right? Izuku says, shaking his head, his attention now more on Tamura's demonstration of skills than the advice. No, however, I'm essentially using a cheat code. But didn't you train for it? You trained your body beyond the normal human limits. You began exploring the potential of our bodies that previous generations have given us, Izuku responds. What on earth are you talking about? Izuku scowls. Really, you haven't done any research and you're using your speed as is. I can do what I can do, Tamura shrugs. I don't have to understand how it works. Izuku sighs. Basically, our biology as a whole has been seriously disrupted by a few generations of eccentricities. Izuku shakes his head. People are more resilient than usual, almost as a way of compensating for all the fighting that occurs now. You know how some people's grandparents gave them horns or skin of a different color? And how their peculiarities don't always include that aspect of them? It's essentially the same thing, but this time, quirks that are more helpful are subtly passed down. Like the ability of your body to access the ability to move at heightened and abnormal speeds. Hey, I'm attempting to clarify this for you. Tamura simply waves off Izuku's cries of outrage, heading back towards his game console. Too many words, he says. I don't give a damn. I'm quick because I'm quick. What the heck, I didn't want to be lectured, I just wanted to show you something. Blah blah blah. Izuku moans. Alright, but at least one final thing, Izuku begs. Tamura moans too, forcing himself to turn around with half his strength. What? Your surname? What? Your surname, Izuku reiterates. I've been referring to you by your given name in my mind the entire time we've known one another, and I've never heard it. Which, given how much time we spend in the same room each day, is a little strange. Even if all you're doing is pouting in the corner. Oh, I'm not being serious. Tamura takes a breath and slaps his hand across his face, saying, FCKN ingrateful BRT, Sragi. What? Izuku blinks. Tamura unmuffles his words and takes his hand away from his face. Shigaraki. There, will that get you off my back? Izuku nods. Shigaraki Tamura, huh? Alright, it's a start. After all, Izuku was already in the vicinity, so he couldn't resist. So he left. And so here he is, hearing her incredibly soothing voice again, even though the topic was anything but soothing. In tones, what he's done to you is horrible, Abara says. It is a most egregious sin that Bakugo Katsuki has committed. I can't condone such behavior. Cushioned inside a softly bound bundle of vines, Izuku just listens to Abara's tirade. Given the circumstances, both as a villain and as a civilian, he hadn't exactly wanted to tell her everything that had happened. But as soon as Abara saw the gadget in his ear, he was powerless to make the choice. Even so, Izuku considers himself fortunate that he hadn't been in for a few days. The absence of communication readily explains how he had obtained his new assistance. Purchasing such a potentially costly device becomes insignificant when you consider that the money from Endeavor is still a significant amount even after all these years. Subconsciously, Shiozaki's vines continue to encircle Izuku. The fact that he's releasing his frustrations upon your being, on somebody that he supposedly once called a friend, is appalling, she says. Izuku lets out a sigh at the inconspicuous gesture. He can tell when Abara is becoming overly agitated. He tries his best to soothe her because he detests it when that occurs. It's alright, Abara, Izuku says. What's done is done. You can't do anything about it. Besides, I'm fine. This is no. Izuku's words are abruptly interrupted when the vines suddenly encircle his mouth. Abara commands, don't you dare finish that sentence. I will not stand by idle and let you further debase yourself. There are people who care about you. People who would be sad without you. You need to see that you're something of worth to the world. That you can make a difference in the world. With a growl, Izuku says, I know that. I understand that I am a person like anyone else. That I can make a difference. You've ingrained that into me. She scoots closer and places her hands on his shoulders, asking, then why do you act like you don't believe any of that? You always put other people's well-being before your own. Always, even when it results in something detrimental to yourself. First of all, you act as though it doesn't even matter that Bakugo has been harassing you for years. As if his health were more vital than yours. Why? Izuku turns away, staring at the floor. Are you requesting that I leave those in need? Abara sighs, of course not. I just don't want to see you destroying yourself, she says. All I'm saying is that you should take some time to yourself. Don't assume that you are responsible for everything, alright? Izuku nods slowly, saying, okay. Abara relaxes and returns to her former posture. I hold you to that. As always, they sit in silence, both absorbing their thoughts over their conversation and taking in the atmosphere. By this time, things usually slow down, either because Izuku is obstinate or simply because there aren't many new subjects to discuss. However, today turns out to be different. Izuku exclaims, it's just, something's missing, much to his own surprise. At that, Abara turns her head and adopts a contemplative look. Like what? Izuku, obviously at a loss for words, just shakes his head. Abara nods in comprehension. Consider for a moment. Tell me, what's the first thing that comes to mind? When you're ready. The response comes much more quickly than anticipated. The words, I, fade from his lips. Yes? I want to punch him, Izuku sighs. Remove that arrogant expression from Bakugo's fucking face. Abara's face remains unchanged, and she asks, then why don't you? Without criticizing him for his desire to resort to violence or his use of foul language. Izuku then responds, I don't know. As the week goes on, Izuku learns a few new things, such as that Tamura Shigaraki doesn't exist, at least not as far as he knows. Either, Tamura Shigaraki is just an alias, or the boy in the bar with the decay quirk had his identity so thoroughly cleaned up that there is no trace of it, either through sensei or other means. It doesn't really matter in the long run, but I was just curious. I don't need to know about him as long as he doesn't hurt me, and I shouldn't let it bother me when it doesn't have to. I've been enjoying my week so far, so why ruin it? Given how shunned he is, Izuku believed that not much would have changed since the day of the incident that permanently damaged his ear, but he was mistaken. Their fuses seemed a little shorter than usual, for starters, but the faculty had started warding off offenders to Izuku's well-being much earlier than before, when they would only step in when failing to do so risked the class getting out of control. The teachers had started to be more watchful and chiding to his bullies. Nothing like outright defending him, of course. Even Bakugo has appeared to back off, if only slightly. Instead of the typical shoves and direct punches, the last few days have been filled with piercing glares and snide scoffs from a distance. It makes me wonder if I can abuse this. What would have happened if I allowed myself to get something like a broken arm during one of the many scuffles I've been a part of over the years? Maybe having physical proof of Bakugo's wrongdoings has suddenly made everyone fall into caution. Izuku snorts at the thought. Izuku shakes his head, realizing that he has more important things to deal with, specifically that Todoroki Shoto is back in his usual location on the shores of Lake Sanaru after a long period of, arguably justified, absence. This change is just as welcome as the others. Izuku gathers all his confidence and approaches the bench, but he doesn't sit down right away, preferring to make his presence known first. Todoroki looks at him briefly and doesn't express any mistrust or a desire to leave right away, so Izuku sits down after he looks at him. As though nothing had changed, Izuku reaches into his bag and hands the boy next to him a bottle of water, which Todoroki takes for the first time and takes a long, pleasant gulp. After closing the bottle and placing it between them, there is only the two boys sitting there, taking in the sunset and the lake's reflections. Minutes go by in this manner until the quiet is broken. I've been giving it some thought. Regarding what you said, Todoroki says, displaying some surprising initiative by starting the conversation. Izuku is stunned and allows the boy to continue. Todoroki lifts his right hand, causing a tiny ice eruption to emerge from his palm. I've had nothing but my ice for a very long time, he says. I considered it to be my only defense against my father's fire. It was one of the few things that gave me solace in remembering my mother. Todoroki raises his left hand and lowers his right, and tiny strands of flame curl up and around his fingers, dancing back and forth with the park breeze. These strands are far smaller than the snow flurries he was creating a moment ago, and it's clear that his control is at best mediocre. Izuku, however, is more interested in the fact that Todoroki is using his flames at all than in those things. Fire only made me think of my dad. He pauses and sighs, but you. He looks at Izuku sideways and says, you made me question some things. And not just my own flames. The stove, candles, even the incense for the offerings too. Smelling the fire in his palm, Todoroki clenches his fist and says, I'm still not convinced, but, not completely, at least. However, if it's okay with you, I'd like to hear more of what you have to say. Izuku blinks as he processes everything he's heard, particularly the last bit. If he's not mistaken, he says, you mean you want me to, what? Can your left side help you with your F? I just wish to practice for now, Todoroki says, nodding. Unlike my father, learn to control my fire. Instead of trying on my own, I figured I'd be better off with your assistance. After all, you have all of those notebooks that you frequently discuss. Additionally, I'm looking for a new style. Ah, Izuku says rather foolishly, clearing his throat, I'm okay. That's fine with me. Todoroki nods. He lifts his left hand once more, and it catches fire. Izuku freezes at the sight of the flame, both because of its sudden size and intensity, which is a significant departure from his previous exhibition. His eyes are focused on the flickering oranges and yellows, and his mind is focused on just one thing. Make an effort. However, he stops himself before he can say anything more. Izuku shakes his head, saying, no, he's not his father. He's different. Can be different. The fact that he's discussing this with me is proof enough that he is different. I'm ready, declares Todoroki. Izuku almost leaps. He nods, letting out a trembling breath, hoping his uneasiness hasn't been apparent. Izuku responds, good, just, one thing. Yes. If you're set on this, know that taking some tips from Endeavor wouldn't be a bad idea. But just, if you do that, make sure that you don't turn out like him. Because then I'd have to do something about you too. The only response Todoroki gives is a simple nod, but he raises an eyebrow at the wording. Izuku is grateful because he was forced to be honest, albeit incoherently. After all, Todoroki was still his age. Todoroki declares, I don't plan on being anything like him, you don't have anything to worry about. It is sufficient for Izuku. He has an endless amount of time to work. Furthermore, he is not going to ruin this. For Todoroki Shoto's sake, if not for his own. I'm here, I am. Izuku moans as he wipes the fatigue of the night from his eyes. His half-drawn blinds let in the early morning light once more, casting dark shadows that dance across the walls and ceiling. I'm present. The familiar catchphrase stops reverberating throughout his room as his hand slams, gently, of course, so as not to damage it, against the top of his alarm clock. He rises, makes his bed, draws the blinds, and then walks over to his laptop. He looks at the screen, and he lets out a sigh of relief when he realizes that nothing is wrong. At this stage, it is typical to see the loading bars, the increasing percentages, and the numerous windows open on the device. After all, even for the limited AI, breaking into secure databases and identifying the main points of hero work convergence are exhausting tasks that Izuku had purchased and had been progressively modifying into its present shape over the previous 4 years. An intelligence network that was at best mediocre had developed into a nationwide surveillance system that would impress the majority of government agencies. This system enables Izuku to carry out his daily task of remotely filling out his notebooks and learning about subjects that are typically not captured on camera. Of course, it isn't perfect. The artificial intelligence is, all things considered, a baby in its role. Izuku still needs to manually check in occasionally because it cannot consistently sort through the data it collects for more complicated tasks, which he currently does. One of the first things he sees when he sits in front of the busy screen is a camera observing the skyline of Fukuoka. The flyer's identity is confirmed by the shape of the overhead shadow that he barely sees as it speeds by. Regretfully, the discovery ultimately brings to mind what may have been the most significant break he has experienced from his laptop's searches. Even though it happened 3 years ago, the specifics are still ingrained in his memory. Izuku was somewhat taken aback when he discovered that the Lady Nagant, under the direction of the Hero Public Safety Commission, had a broad role in proactively eliminating problematic roots in society before they became an issue for the social order. He was even more shocked to learn that the former hero's career ended with her direct involvement in the death of the HPSC president and the well-known death of the professional hero Night Sparrow. And he dug deeper as a result. There is no question that Nagant was the murderer of Night Sparrow, who was discovered dead in a warehouse with a bullet wound directly through his skull. However, examining Night Sparrow's pre-death activities showed that he spent hours engaging in maritime smuggling at night and that there was strict regulation and retaliation against competing drug operations. It did provide sufficient evidence that the hero was probably Nagant's final target, in addition to making Izuku less sympathetic to his cause. Overall, given the closeness of the two incidents, it makes sense that the commission used it to conceal the passing of their president. Afterward, Lady Nagant herself appeared. Her carefree and cheerful song was a stark contrast to the unusual, distant demeanor she displayed in the week prior to her arrest. She had obviously had an epiphany because of her frequent cases of baggy eyes, late-night coffee breaks, and fidgeting around kids. She probably lost faith in the system herself. One that simply turned out to be far messier and bloodier than most. Izuku can at least admire her for it. She was, after all, duped and brainwashed at a young, impressionable age. He found the rest of the information along with that little tidbit, but for some reason he couldn't quite understand at the time. It stood out more than the others. It only became clear to him a few days later while he was at Crimson Riot's orphanage, and it made him feel nauseous. If anything, Izuku is frustrated that he is powerless to assist Nagant. She is not under his control while she is in Tartarus. He can only watch her replacement with caution for the time being. Izuku will make an effort to guide Hawks toward realization, even though it is ultimately up to the wing hero whether or not he chooses to follow in her footsteps. All you need to do is look for a chance to do it, and even in that case, Izuku restrains himself from continuing. Similar findings and revelations have been made over the years, with varying degrees of severity, ranging from Izuku's disgust to his horror, concentrating on the latter. Unfortunately, thinking in the morning usually results in that. Izuku derails his own thoughts after falling prey to such a thing once more. He leans toward things that are more accommodating. Reviewing something that is somewhat less grim but still relevant to the subject at hand is the goal, as in. Oh. Indeed. Izuku zooms in on one of his open windows, revealing a camera that glimpses a familiar face entering Sunaruko Park. Over the years, his time with Todoroki Shitoto has been productive. The boy had even proven to be a surprisingly reliable and plentiful source of information. Izuku is aware that, even within his own house, Endeavor remains the brazen, loud-mouthed person he is. He didn't realize it, but Todoroki has shown him that his loudness and bravado also carry over into his phone conversations. He would be shouting and yelling with that fiery attitude of his and getting away with it, whether he was speaking to other professionals or even commission officials. It's his own fault that he wasn't keeping a lid on things around his kids if those conversations turned out to be about private information about upcoming raids or meetings. The same is true of his failure to warn his kids about such topics. Naturally, though, these advantages had to have drawbacks of their own. After all, Todoroki isn't the type to go around distributing such things. In the first instance, he prefers to frown and keep to himself over interacting with others. Furthermore, he is too intelligent to overlook the significance of keeping such matters confidential. As a result, the boy needed some persuasion to divulge the information. Todoroki would provide Izuku with small bits of information in exchange for his assistance in controlling and mastering his fire. Naturally, nothing too damning, not that Izuku doesn't have any, given all the evidence he's accumulated over the years, but enough to support his surveillance efforts across the nation. Regretfully, this request hasn't improved the overall state of affairs. Todoroki turns out to be a fervent conspiracy theorist. Since everyone is free to do as they please, Izuku is not one to pass judgment. However, Todoroki is more curious than most because of this pastime. Izuku is also positive that Todoroki has realized the darker sides of his personality, at least in some cases. The fact that Izuku occasionally displays his blatant contempt for Endeavor doesn't help either, or that he says some pretty strong things about some heroes, or agrees with his general contempt for societal functions and wants them to be dismantled and reassessed. Nevertheless, Todoroki occasionally opened up after learning about his experiences. He would catch Todoroki staring during these moments. When Izuku's tirades lasted too long, the boy's eyes would narrow and his forehead would furrow as his mind processed the details. Izuku is aware that he ought to be concerned about the possible information leak. He is aware that he needs to take action regarding Todoroki Shoto. However, he has refrained from taking any action of that nature. Todoroki isn't exactly interested in snitching, after all. Shoto had been honest when he said as such, and Izuku had asked directly. Izuku would have faced a completely different issue if the boy had managed to maintain his heartbeat while lying. Izuku firmly established in his mind to cease broadcasting his capabilities just in case after taking a modest but healthy dose of paranoia. Abara and Todoroki are the only people who were aware of the situation, besides the Kamino Bar trio. He is therefore prepared to maintain the status quo. Izuku is startled out of his reverie by the abrupt creaking of the floorboards. As soon as he calms down, he understands that there is no threat, but he still scowls back. These days, he couldn't resist doing so whenever he thought of his mother. After all, you would expect your parents to be concerned if you came home one day with a device in your ear that was clearly intended to prevent damage. After that, said parents would piece together that it wasn't a coincidence that you kept returning home with injuries. Then, the parents would recall a brazen, blonde boy who had become increasingly hostile as he grew older. That's what one would expect, anyway. Izuku himself only dreamed of such things happening in fever dreams. Because he had such low expectations, he was unimpressed when his mother saw the gadget, remained silent, and simply hurried to her room. It's true that she started crying in private. Regardless of how muffled or restrained the action was, Izuku's quirk allowed him to hear it. He thought he could have been grateful for the gesture, but he was unable to do so. You know, too little, too late. However, Izuku made a number of decisions that day. Is his mother concerned about anything? Izuku knows for sure. How far does that care extend? Not enough, obviously, to confront him about it, or to shout it out, or to seek just retribution from the person who had harmed her son. Although she cares, her overall demeanor is aloof and cold. Overall, she has resigned. Resolved to do nothing but accept the status quo. Izuku wishes he didn't have to see her because that alone would remind him of her neglect. It's true that occasionally spending time at Abara's helps to stifle that dislike. However, he cannot stay in Yokohama indefinitely. After all, the Shiozakis would become suspicious. Naturally, he must spend the majority of his time at his apartment. And even though he makes every effort, it's practically impossible for him to avoid falling into the same room as his mother. When it comes right down to it, he still shares a home with her, so he must communicate with her at least somewhat frequently. After all, in a two-bedroom apartment this small, it's difficult to avoid bumping into someone. Here he is, making his own breakfast while his mother is seated at the dining room table across from him. As usual, there is a great deal of silence, the only sound in the room being the crunching of food and the clash of cutlery with the dishes. The minutes pass quickly, and Izuku finishes his breakfast shortly after. As he stands up to go, he notices that Inko's mouth is moving. He waits for his mother to say something for a moment. Muttering, "How is school?" He pauses. Izuku glances over. She appears okay. She still appears to be a little sleepy, and she had bedhead, Other than that, she's doing well. Years ago, when his father's passing was still very much in the forefront of his thoughts, she looked utterly devastated. It merely emphasizes that even though she has moved past a portion of her past, she still won't engage with him the way she did when he was younger. He becomes even less interested in extending the conversation as a result. He responds, same as always, oh. She is aware of what that implies. Given how frequently he had been injured in the previous years, it was difficult to resist. It's evident in her face. And it comes through in her voice. However, she continues to take no action. He then makes his way to his room with the intention of getting ready for school. That's it. Izuku finds that his school day is going slowly once more. It's been the same routine for years, day by day, with only minor changes here and there. If anything, Tsubasa's sudden departure from school was the biggest disturbance to the never-ending cycle. Izuku's kind of friend moved to Jaku City in Kyoto 2 years ago to live with one of his relatives after completely leaving Shizuoka. Because he manages the primary hospital in the area, it appears that said relative is fairly wealthy. Naturally, Izuku wished Tsubasa well, despite the fact that he ultimately lost one of his primary sources of support in Aldera. After all, Izuku couldn't really rely on Kei's Takahashi. It wasn't that the boy had broken his promise, he still genuinely refrained from doing anything that would have brought Izuku bad luck. However, over the past year, Takahashi's demeanor had changed, and instead of his typical mischievousness, he had lost his short fuse. Izuku doesn't pry because that isn't his place, particularly if doing so could jeopardize their mutual agreement. And with Takahashi's mood swings, who can tell? Ultimately, even though the two had developed a kind of mutual understanding over the years, they were still only acquaintances at best. Just two boys willing to uphold a neutrality agreement while attempting to survive in the terrible school environment. Izuku is therefore left to waste his time as a conduit for the bullies at Aldera Junior High. Furthermore, it's not as though anything has improved, on the contrary, things have gotten worse. Izuku had previously gone toe-to-toe with his tormentors before the verbal retort that gave him his damaged ear. From altercations behind the school to punches thrown, to long-lasting bruises, and all points in between. And because he can always tell when the teachers are around, he hasn't even been caught. Overall, Bakugo himself is the only individual Izuku hasn't included in his campaigns for apparent reasons, which Izuku willfully ignores. Naturally, this doesn't stop the bullies from withdrawing to the faculty and yelling the victim's words. However, there had been a minor setback to their plans. The school has become disinterested because the complaints haven't come from its best student. Fortunately, Izuku's luck appeared to be on the rise for once. Naturally, that wasn't the case for very long. There were never any consequences because there was no proof and only the hearsay of schoolchildren to go by. However, despite the possibility of losing their jobs, the faculty didn't appear to be complacent. These affairs ultimately resulted in delinquent marks on Izuku's records, whether they were motivated by proactive measures to preserve their jobs or perhaps just to discredit him. In any case. And that's where all the positive aspects of his unfortunate life came together to balance out. Regardless of how fabricated and/or biased the facts are, his record by this point did not bode well for his chances of being admitted to prestigious hero schools like Shiketsu and Yue. Other than children his own age, Izuku has no one to support him. This small group of villains isn't the most trustworthy group if he wanted the police to sympathize with him. It is undoubtedly a barrier to his intended future. Izuku, however, is not overly concerned because he finds comfort in the fact that some schools, such as Ketsubutsu Academy, still have a much more lenient stance toward application requirements. Naturally, though, the complications didn't stop there. As if things weren't already awful, Izuku's tormentors' failed attempts to get him in trouble with the faculty only led to more severe retaliation from them, with their plans and schemes taking the form of more violent pranks on him. Izuku thought he was fortunate to have survived Takahashi's more realistic uses of tripped feet and trapped lockers, but the numerous new experiences he had were on an entirely different level. Izuku acknowledges that defacing his desk every month in front of teachers is a rather daring move. Well, unless you took into account the deliberate ignorance of the teachers. Even though the graffiti has bombarded his mind with insults and harsh, direct language, he isn't particularly bothered by them. He is able to overcome them. Yes, of course. The most outrageous of these incidents may have involved a girl in her upper year and 3 guys who thought they had been lying completely undetected with their bucket full of pig blood because one of the boys' parents owned the neighborhood butcher shop. The whole thing made him think of a book from the pre-quirk era that he had read once, a long time ago. Without the whole destroy the school part, of course. He can't go that far because he has a fairly good handle on himself. Seldom. In the end, Izuku is motivated by the fact that he has been the target of the majority of the torment due to his increased aggression. Izuku is able to accept the fact that the other students who share his mental state are given more leeway than is customary. Naturally, he hasn't informed Abara of his increased activity. After all, she won't be concerned about what she doesn't know. The lull of his class period breaks out of its stupor, abruptly interrupting his thoughts. He is startled out of his reverie by a tiny explosion that appears a short distance away. He almost leaps from his desk, but he barely controls his reflex. Bakugo is, of course, the source. It takes some mental backtracking of his surroundings and the teacher's mutterings to figure out the blonde's reasoning for his outburst, but as soon as he starts to think about hero schools, his mind can't help but long for his negative side. Heroes? As though. Given their acts against the student body as a whole, let alone their typical behaviors, half of the class alone shouldn't even be regarded as credible applicants in such programs. He chooses to keep his profile low in order to deflect attention from himself, ignoring Bakugo's impending tirade. Until the end of the period, Bakugo's self-imposed narcissistic superiority continues to elicit reactions of contempt and impudence. Izuku waits for the foot traffic to thin out while seated at his desk. Bakugo and his two friends are willing to overlook him most of the time these days. It appears that today is one of the rare occasions when that isn't the case. The first person to arrive at Bakugo's desk is Makoto Tobito, the boy who had occupied the vacant spot among his tag-alongs after Tsubasa left. His peculiarity, an elongating nose that gives him improved smell, is rather ordinary. Every time he engages with Izuku, he makes use of it. Izuku views it as a form of intimidation, and one that is generally unsuccessful. But the man of the hour soon makes an appearance. Yo, Deku. Before his head is abruptly pushed flat against his notebook, Izuku is unable to raise it from where he is studying his notes in time. With difficulty pronouncing the words given his position, Izuku asks, "What the hell do you want, Bakugo?" However, that doesn't stop him from carrying out his recently chosen confrontation strategy. When speaking to the blonde, his verbal backtalk has gotten more extreme, and Bakugo seems to be accepting the change as a challenge. Izuku, however, takes care to avoid going too far in case the previous incident happens again. "I highly doubt that you just want to see me." Bakugo briefly stands in front of him, pressing his hand to his skull. Undoubtedly prompted by the teacher's reference to Yue, they were likely attempting to come up with something to use against him. He looks at the desk below. Izuku is already aware of what he is seeing. **T. Never again. Lifting Izuku's head, Bakugo swipes the notebook off Izuku's desk while glancing at the cover, asking, "The hell is this? Analysis for the future number 87? Izuku lets out a sigh. "Look, that shit about you becoming a hero, huh?" Bakugo interrupts. "Well, you better take a long look at it then, 'cause that's going to be the closest you'll ever be to being a hero, you hear?" Before the notebook is flung out the window, he sees it get caught in a tiny explosion. Hearing it land in the koi pond outside gives Izuku a tiny sense of relief. He can handle pages that are soaked after all. A heap of ashes is far less likely to be recoverable. Nevertheless, he can't help but sense the rage simmering beneath the surface. Izuku, take deep breaths. Inhale deeply. Just beneath the desk, out of sight of the three of them, his fists clench. However, he refrains. Bakugo lowers himself to look into Izuku's eyes and slams his hand down on the desk. "So, you're still aiming to be a hero, Deku?" Izuku turns his head sideways and scoffs. "Not like I can even apply to Yue at this point," he murmurs. "Huh?" exclaims Bakugo, who cups one ear. "What was that? Didn't hear you." Izuku looks Bakugo in the eyes as he turns his head back. "I'm not even planning on even trying to apply to Yue, Bakugo," he states. "If it means you'll be there, then no, not when it implies that they welcome individuals like you." Undoubtedly stunned by the admission, Bakugo blinks. After all, it's the first time he's heard of it. He retreats, almost weakly, and says, "Huh." Bakugo, "Huh?" Makoto says. Bakugo's usual angry expression returns. A smirk appears on his lips, and a low laugh escapes his lips as that shakes him out of whatever thoughts had been occupying him. "Looks like you finally know your place," he says with a gleam in his eye. "I'm feeling giving today. You know, there is a way out of this. Because you're such a worthless and useless Deku?" "Oh," Izuku agrees and says, "And what's that?" Although Bakugo knows that his words are audible, he turns and begins to leave the classroom, saying, "Take a swan dive off the roof. Perhaps your next life will bring you a better quirk." Izuku snorts when the three depart from his immediate area. "Yeah, right. It might be a legitimate method of undermining him, though, as if I would give him the satisfaction. You have a lot to offer the world, but it would be a waste of life. Yes, I am aware of that. Both the burns and the water damage were far less severe than he had anticipated. He's been trying to dry it all out during his walk, but the notebook had fallen into the water on its back end, so the charring didn't even reach past the cover, and the majority of the wet pages weren't even filled in yet. When he hears it, he is doing so rather quickly. Izuku can clearly hear the approaching liquid-like form moving through the sewers at a fairly high rate of speed, using the damp and slimy environment to navigate the underground maze with ease. He is walking beneath an overpass, in an obscure location that doesn't get much traffic at this time of day, but that isn't important. Izuku carefully eyes the sludge flowing up and out, backing away slowly as he notices the two eyes that pop up from its midst. The unknown entity chooses the manhole just in front of him as their exit, whether it is due to his bad luck and misfortune or some tested actions of the gods. Then, a transformation or mutation quirk. Green, mud-like sludge. A smile that seems malevolent. Teeth but no tongue. He pays attention. Despite his eyes, there was no visible heartbeat or other organs. This was probably a quirk of transformation. Then he sniffs the air. He also smells. I'm not sure if this is a side effect of his quirk or from going through the sewers, but it could be crippling. Next up. His size ratio is larger than that of a normal human. Is this a quirk or has he been consuming the garbage and gunk from the sewer? He probably has more strength and speed, is durable, and can probably ignore most physical attacks. The main attack method might be overwhelming a weaker target, judging by the way he's staring at me. Suffocation by engulfing his victims with his body. Howdy. What do we have here? The sludge asks, laughing. I'd like to take this cute little puppet. The best escape route will be you. I'm not likely to beat him as is because there are no ears there that I can overwhelm to disable him, and normal grappling and CQC would only get me into his grasp. Puppet. Keyword. Hints at potential body snatching capabilities. Makes sense if he's being chased, which he hinted at. Using his quirk to help him avoid and predict the direction of the sludge's attack, Izuku sidesteps to the left and jumps backwards when he hears the sludge reconverging and lunging towards his form once more. Izuku is quick enough to avoid the sludge, which moves more quickly than one might anticipate for a creature of his size and estimated weight. I'm grateful, Tamura. Punk, stay motionless. It will hurt more the longer you drag this out. The only normal human components present are the eyes and teeth, which are unlikely to be positioned or choked. The eyes are probably still soft and fragile, so he dodges again and uses the time he has to think of a plan. I have some supplies in my bag, including pencils, paper, and my knife, and I can punch them if it gets to that stage. He hears another figure speeding through the sewers, but this one is much faster, has a typical human shape, and if the displacement of the air is any indication, its heart is very muscular and not even straining. He can think of only a handful of people who meet the narrow set of criteria he's found, and when he looks at the exposed sewer entry, he almost passes out from what he sees. It's, citizen, don't worry, I am here. Izuku's form is blasted by a gust of wind. His face and clothing are covered in splatters as muck and stray sewage are mixed into the flurry. Izuku, however, is unaware of this. He is not aware of the natural moisture that now stains his clothes or the foul smell that fills his nostrils. He is too preoccupied to do anything but stare, his gaze fixed on the legendary symbol of peace. The villain splatters fairly easily, with All Might's punch alone sending pieces of him flying across the underpass's walls and floor. Izuku had anticipated that the hero would be unstoppable and as well known as he is, and this is exactly what he did. However, All Might's cautious and squeamish approach to zooming around, collecting the villain's remains inside some clear plastic bottles he had discovered laying around on the street, somewhat undoes the effect. However, that doesn't alter the fact that All Might was the hero before Izuku. He's got questions, and sitting there staring in wonder won't answer them. In order to appear respectable and attract the man's attention, he raises an enclosed fist to his mouth and clears his throat. Oh! All Might yells, almost dropping the bottles he is holding that are covered in sludge. I'm sorry, young man, but I need a little more time to catch this bad guy. Then All Might coughs, covering his mouth with his hand. Shit, Izuku almost screams in shock, not because of the profanity but for another reason. Naturally, he suppresses the urge to do so, but what he heard makes him shudder. All Might clears his throat and resumes his work as if nothing had happened. Then I'll be right over. Izuku doesn't see the final scene. He is too preoccupied with the thought that All Might is lacking a lung. As promised, however, it did take an additional moment. After rushing around in a blur for 2 seconds, the sludge is crammed into 3 bottles and securely fastened to All Might's waist. After another quick burst of speed, he finds himself directly in front of Izuku, which stops the boy from daydreaming. All Might stoops to retrieve Izuku's notebook, which had dropped to the floor from the chaos of the previous few minutes. I must say, young man, you did quite a profound job in evading this villain's attacks. Yours, I presume? Izuku gives a frantic nod. All Might opens the notebook and exclaims, an autograph it is. Then, he searches the pages for a blank one to write on. I must say, this is some impressive work, young man. Info on upcoming heroes like Kamui Woods and Mount Lady, and even villains like Habit Headgear and Thousand Eyes. If I didn't know any better, I'd call you a professional quirk analyst. Izuku asks, you really think so? Affirmatively hums All Might. He extracts a pen from his pockets with his hand. His hand swirls, implanting his signature across 2 entire pages of Izuku's notebook. And there you are, my boy. Izuku carefully picks up the notebook and says, whoa, you have no idea how much this is making my day, especially with everything I've been going through lately. All Might firmly pats Izuku on the back, almost knocking him over, saying, I'm glad to hear that, young man. However, Izuku bounces back pretty quickly. Izuku spouts, if it's okay with you, I have some questions for you. His bottled-up questions and thoughts are almost bursting from their metaphorical seams. For example, I was wondering about your opinion on... no time for that. Tell a lie. Izuku's thoughts stop. What? After a few blinks, he turns to face All Might. That can't be correct. I need to confirm. This time, he puts his ideas into words. What? I don't have the time, my boy. I'd love to stay and chat, but I have lots of work to do. Tell a lie. The whole sentence, every single part of it, was a lie. That is supported by the elevated respiration and heart rate as well as the sweaty palms. None of those are the product of hard work. Not with the ease with which All Might defeats villains. However, there must be a cause. He's actually a busy man, but he isn't, since he implied that he had work to do, which was untrue. I need more details. All Might gives a mock salute and says, now, if you'll excuse me. He aims for the sky as he turns and bends his knees. What a waste. He's getting ready to leap. I won't have another opportunity. He acts without thinking. He briefly finds himself giving Tamura another mental thank you for all of the years of speed training. He then finds himself cursing Tamura because Izuku couldn't have reached All Might in time if it weren't for him. Consequently, he would not be moving at speeds of hundreds of kilometers per hour or at altitudes of hundreds of meters. Oh no. Every second he clings precariously to All Might's leg, he feels his grip loosening ever so slightly, and he can hardly open his eyes due to the air rushing past his face. All Might yells, whoa there, and swats lightly at his unexpected passenger. There's such a thing as being too clingy, you know, I have personal space too. Let go please. Izuku is briefly taken aback by All Might's ability to speak at such high speeds, but he dismisses the intrigue and employs one of his quirk's more manual applications. Let go? Do you want me to die? For a moment, All Might is clearly stunned. Oh. Izuku feels a sense of relief as the slow descent starts. As All Might lands on a rooftop, he finally hears the crash of feet on concrete as the sounds of cars and people get closer and closer. Izuku collapses to the ground in a heap as his clinging grip breaks. Yes, never again. That was highly irresponsible, young man. All Might chastises Izuku immediately as he looks down at him. If not for your commendable grip strength, which I do applaud, by the way, you could have died. Izuku pushes himself off the ground after taking a deep breath. Sorry, All Might, but I just really want to ask you some questions. They're too important to be left unanswered. I know that I won't get another chance at doing so, and... All Might interrupts rather abruptly. All right, I'll answer your questions. Just make them quick please. I have somewhere that I need to go soon. As of right now, Izuku chooses to ignore it. I can't just jump right into the main topic. I have to build up to it. I'll start with something different, then. Izuku clears his throat, and concludes with a spiel. What are your opinions on the quirkless? For example, the most widely accepted fact about them is that they make up 20% of the current population. But that's actually a slight misconception and generalization. A majority of that 20% consists of the elderly and those of past generations, people who grew up with less prejudice and by now already have support systems. In truth, 0.2% of the current quirkless population are people 18 and under. That's just over 22 million people. And over 15% of those people, That's over 3 million. Commit suicide before they reach maturity. I've been going through the records of your agency and I haven't seen any form of awareness for these people. Victims of the prejudice our society perpetuates. In fact. Whoa whoa whoa. Says All Might. I believe that I got the gist of it, lie. So, back in my day, I never heard of such a thing. I mean, sure, there was some bullying. But it wasn't all too bad. Lie. Are you sure that you fact-checked your sources? I mean, I've checked, Izuku says, squinting his eyes. So you didn't know any of that? I'll admit that I haven't bothered with overlooking such topics. The truth, Izuku asks, would you mind looking into it? You wouldn't mind spreading some awareness about this stuff, would you? It's a bit hard getting this information out there because of active government-led interference, widespread prejudice, massive societal surveillance. Certain heroes not caring for this stuff. Thinking it beneath their abilities. Also, similar situations exist for people with weak, or villainous, quirks, as society calls them, just a little bit less severe. All Might grins. But of course, my boy, I'll get right on it. The truth. Izuku exhales with relief. Now, says All Might, if that's all. Wait, shouts Izuku. He is very demanding. I'll lose him if I don't answer the main question. What's your opinion on Endeavor? All Might furrows his brow. Endeavor? He ponders the question for a moment. Well, I suppose that he's a rather dutiful hero. Did you know that despite being just below me in the rankings, he's closed almost double the amount of cases than I have? I do, Izuku says with a slightly irritated nod. He manages to turn All Might's fun fact around, though, so he ignores the annoyance. But are you aware that the reasoning behind such an achievement is because of his harsh methods out on the field? Izuku inquires. Harsh? Asks All Might. Highest recorded statistical collateral damage of all heroes since the Quirk War, an abnormally large amount of critically injured captures, and several civilian deaths? My boy, you can't go around making baseless accusations like that. Izuku twitches one of his eyes. Baseless? All Might smiles and says, yes, Endeavor's a fellow hero like myself. He isn't anything at all like you described. A little rough around the edges, sure, but nothing to the likes that you're telling me. Which parts of truth and lie are there? During that outburst, his breathing was erratic. Izuku continues, surely you've seen the way he treats his kids, how he treated his wife, how his actions led to where his wife currently is now. All Might scowls. All Might coughs once more, and his lone lung rattles. I'll admit that I have noticed in the past that relations between himself and his children are rather strained. But really, All Might drips blood from his mouth. Look, my boy, I really need to go. All Might starts to head for the door, but Izuku stops him. No, I won't let you. What were you going to say? I really, my boy. Izuku gives a scowl. Talk. All Might scoffs. He is suddenly surrounded by a cloud of smoke. Izuku doesn't even have to wait for the smoke to clear before he realizes what has happened because of the way the wind is crashing into the hero's body. All Might is not as muscular as he usually is, and his features are gaunt. Izuku's mind is racing with ideas. Is there a deadline? A peculiarity of transformation? False identity? But he quickly returns his attention to the subject. When the smoke clears, all that's left is a man who looks like a sheep. He tries to control the situation by talking right away, but his expression says it all. My boy, I can explain. You see, 5 years ago. Izuku asks, you're actually All Might, correct? Izuku interrupts, and does this have to do with your missing lung? All Might looks in astonishment. Before he nods in agreement, he pauses. Yes. For both questions. I promise, even if I don't know how you know about my condition. The truth. Izuku is already aware of what transpired after that. There is only one plausible explanation given the supporting evidence of his missing lung, the bloody coughs that were associated with it, and All Might's admission that the injury occurred 5 years ago. The notorious All for One is sensei. Izuku goes on to say, my quirk is how I know, but that doesn't matter, putting the idea away for later. What were you going to say a while ago? I need to know. All Might gives his head a back rub. He gulps at Izuku's face and asks, you really are serious about this, are you? Right, alright. I was just going to say that, well, Endeavor is a swell guy, you know? I know that he's a good person at heart, and that what he's going through right now. Again, truth and lie. Why is he providing me with contradicting information? Izuku's eyes widen as he realizes he can't. No, is he? No fucking way. Izuku declares, you're lying to yourself, You don't want to believe that it's true. That Endeavor's not fit to be a hero. All Might gives a headshake. I very much believe the words that I am saying. Tell a lie. That's it. Izuku snarls. You mean that you actually believe that bullshit you spout? That everyone is a good person at heart? That given enough time they'll dig up their hidden qualities of goodness and compassion? You're kidding me. How long have you known that Endeavor's been abusing his family? I don't know that, responds All Might. I've only suspected, and just ever so slightly, and even then I can't just. So, Izuku senses anger ascending from the abyss. What's stopping you from checking? Calling child services? I don't want to raise trouble where it's not due. Izuku can feel his fists clenching. You're willing to stand by while injustice continues to occur? Just like that? It's not my place to pry. You're a hero. The hero. Even the police work by the standard of reasonable suspicion. Why the hell can't you? You're not in a position to flaunt your shallow and naive ideals of righteousness and justice. All Might shouts, young man, that is enough. You aren't in the same position as I am. You have no right, no partial understanding. Izulu growls in response. Stop talking. No, you listen here, I've known Enji since my years at UA. There is a delicate. He only hears falsehoods. Excuses. His world was falling apart. Stop talking. All Might's strained face and the speed at which his hand reaches for his throat give the impression that he is choking. Well, he isn't. However, when someone suddenly loses the ability to speak, it is easy to predict how they will react. Guess what they say is true, huh? Izuku asks, laughing on his own. Never meet your heroes, because you'd only be setting yourself up to disappointment. Izuku approaches the building's edge and peers over it. He jumps after dispelling the dampening field surrounding All Might's head. With his buff form poised to materialize, All Might dashes to the edge. However, he sighs with relief when he discovers that Izuku has only leapt to the safety of the fire escape below, not to his death. My boy. And once more, All Might loses his voice. Don't follow me, All Might, tells Izuku. I don't need you mucking up my life even more. Izuku's bad day had gotten worse. He had already been suicide baited by Bakugo and his thugs, but All Might had to add the cherry on top by admitting that he is just another blatantly complacent part of the corrupt system that is in place. As he stoops in his thoughts, Izuku's current walk through the streets is actually aimless, with his feet taking him wherever. It isn't until he gets close enough to the incident to hear it with his own ears that he realizes he's unconsciously showing off his quirk by following the trail towards familiar sounds. Glancing up, he assesses the scene unfolding across the street. The previous sludge villain is wreaking havoc. Izuku is certain that it is the same person from earlier, so it must have gotten out of All Might's control somehow. Most likely during Izuku's spontaneous flight, from which he would have been too distracted to notice, and which, had All Might jostled up enough, would have made it seem possible for the bottles to fall from his waist. Numerous heroes were observing the scene without getting involved. Mount Lady, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Backdraft, and All Might were the five. Given that her peculiarity might cause more harm than good if she tried to capture the villain, it makes sense that MT Lady would be happy to just sit back and unwind. Naturally, that line of reasoning is called into question when you take into account the possibility that her larger stature would extinguish the fires that were occupying Backdraft. She doesn't seem to think that way about a solution, though, based on what Izuku has seen of her. She's more of a glory hunter, if anything. She's happy to take center stage as long as she gets good ratings, regardless of how it affects other people. For the others, Death Arms might try hurling projectiles rather than just standing there doing nothing. Izuku is prepared to attribute Kamui Woods' lack of foresight to his inexperience, but he could at least attempt attacking from the rooftops. He does have points because, at the very least, he appeared composed and calculating about the situation. And All Might. Izuku doesn't know why the man, in his weaker state, was merely observing from the crowd. He couldn't give a damn, though. The victim trapped in the shape of the sludge, however, is what truly grabs Izuku's attention. Since it's Bakugo Katsuki, of course. From within the sludge that envelops his form, he observes Bakugo flailing pointlessly, his explosions serving no purpose. He is lashing out in all directions, his eyes brimming with rage. Since Izuku is positive that he started the fires, he bears some indirect responsibility for the delay in the hero's arrival to save him. Izuku, if anything, mentions karma. But he's thinking about something else. Something with deep roots that has surfaced again. He is aware that the sludge villain's eyes are probably one of his weaknesses. He could tell them. Inform the heroes. There was something he could do. However, A whisper in the back of his mind begs him to leave him alone. Allow him to suffer. Check out how he enjoys it. He obeys even though he's almost terrified of how fast his mind makes decisions for him. He walks away after turning around. He must think about these things. He needs to speak with Abara. As soon as he reaches Hanmoku City Park, Izuku observes that there isn't an Abara on the property. It's not a shocking realization. After all, he can't count on his friend to be at the park whenever he needs her. However, Izuku is aware of her dependability and that she consistently shows up for him whenever he needs her. Because the things he is thinking about are too important to put off for another day, he is therefore happy to wait however long it takes for her to arrive. Izuku is there, his eyes fixed on the ground, his mind racing, his peculiarity leading the way. He only notices the hand after it has fallen onto his shoulder, which is not surprising. These days, his carelessness over awareness has become the norm for him. But he still reacts in spite of that. Quickly, he moves to neutralize the attacker by grabbing the hand on his shoulder and the attached arm. Izuku doesn't stop until he looks at the face of his alleged assailant. Hazuki-san. The one and only. Chuckles the man who goes by Crimson Riot. You really got me there, you know. Didn't even see you move. Looks like those self-defense lessons haven't gone to waste, Ah. Izuku releases Hazuki's arm and moves to apologize by bowing. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was you. No need, Midoriya. I probably should have called out to y'all anyways. I got what was coming for me. Izuku leaps back up. Right, wait, what are you doing here? What about your place? Bah. I have a friend of mine watching the kids. He smiles. Well, friend is stretching it, but I trust them. Izuku blinked. So you're just here for a stroll then? Hazuki's face grows serious. Not quite. In response, Izuku frowns. What's wrong? Hazuki has a clear throat. He shakes his head and says, the Shiozakis asked me to come by just in case you showed up. Didn't think you'd actually show, though. Now He repeatedly shakes his head and interrupts himself. Izuku starts to feel a wave of dread. Why would they do that? Hazuki sighs. Izuku notices the hopelessness concealed in his eyes, and the things he says validate his worst suspicions. It's Abara. It's absurd. A fight that lasted for blocks broke out between a rookie hero going by the name Amber Aspect and an E-ranking villain named Invisible Wall. The hero was so annoyed by the villain's habit of changing the color of his skin to fit his surroundings that he decided it would be a good idea to start firing his lasers at random until he struck the villain. In addition to Invisible Wall's escape, Amber Aspect was also getting away with it, even though he had caused hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage. It's true that his beams aren't very powerful. Furthermore, they are not lethal on their own. However, his volley of assaults was sufficient to bring down building fragments everywhere. And it was precisely that falling debris that had landed on Abara. Izuku, however, is at least glad that his friend is still alive. She had suffered a concussion when the first wave of debris that had fallen on her struck her head. Her leg was almost crushed when the second wave hit it. Izuku was aware of Abara's good fortune. Abara might have perished if the debris had fallen a bit more quickly, slightly to the left, or even slightly to the right. What would have happened to it? Of course, he would have been devastated. Her parents would, too. Hazuki and his children would, too. But to the wider world, in the righteous struggle against the scum of society, she would have been merely another statistic and unfortunate casualty. Worst of all, there would have been absolutely no consequences for Amber Aspect. The entire incident would be covered up by the commission, and everyone would have been living their lives as if nothing had happened. As though no one had died. The constant beeping of the heart monitor still pierces his ears and enters his head as he ponders these ideas. The fact that she will fully recover when time allows is one of the few comforts he has left. She's sleeping soundly, however, her words are still reverberating in his mind. You ought to forge your own route, adhere to your convictions. Do what you believe to be right, be authentic. I'm sorry, Abara. Tears are streaming from his eyes as his hands clench into fists. He pulls his notebook out of his backpack. When he turns the page, it is blank. His determination only gets stronger when he sees All Might's big, flamboyant signature staring back at him. He continues to plod. Once more, he turns to a page that is completely blank. He writes endlessly, pouring his heart out onto the paper. Nevertheless, enough concealment is maintained to keep Abara safe. He abandons the notebook in its entirety. Since he no longer needs it, he placed it on her bedside for everyone to see. Goodbye. Before leaving the room, he gives Abara one last glance before clicking the door shut. He moves left, right, and down the hall. He walks into the bathroom and into a stall. After pulling out his phone, he searches through his small contact list until he locates the one number he needs. After just a brief pause, he applies pressure. The phone then rings, and the answer is found. Bah. Back the H. Hell up. Or else. I mean it. The man has a wild expression in his eyes and is trembling. Without a doubt, he is scared and doubtful. The sharp spines that protrude from his arms and back tremble just a little, as if they were about to shoot out over the throng. 10, 20, or even 30 people could easily be struck, and the entry wounds could result in serious harm or even death. The villain, the man, goes on, "I'm not afraid of the consequences anymore. You have no idea what it's like, while living." Unfortunately, such a tragedy is not intended to occur. Not when some people are present to protect the civilian population of Japan. The landscape is ripped with a blur of speed that effortlessly passes the traffic, which is made up of both people and debris. Just a moment, perhaps two, and that's all. In an instant, the antagonist is unconscious on the chilly concrete. All for the symbol of peace in a single day. "Don't fear, citizens," exclaims All Might, giving the assembled crowd his trademark smile. The situation has been handled. As they chant the name of their savior, the crowd gives a heartfelt cheer. Their previous expressions of anxiety and fear vanish in an instant. After years and years of selfless service, the crowd is overcome with amazement and awe from the first few seconds. All Might stays for a while, smiling and waving to the audience. But before his admirers can start to swarm him, he picks the unconscious villain up and places it beneath his arm. All Might declares, "Sorry, but I can't stay for any longer. I've got a villain to turn in, after all." He then leaps into the air. As he climbs higher and higher, the yells and cheers become less noticeable. With his height and speed, he's practically flying as the wind whips past his ears and through his hair. When they see the renowned #1 hero in person, even for a brief moment, people on the ground point and stare, unable to maintain their composure. He ignores them, though. Why up here? All Might feels free, freed from all the stifling social pressures and terrifying scrutinies. Some people might be surprised to learn that even All Might is not perfect. He gets tired, irritated, and experiences pain. He is also a human. On some days, he wishes he could just retire, find peace, and settle down far from the danger and bustle. But whenever that thought raises its provocative head, he instantly and consistently pushes it away. Even after suffering severe injuries in All for One's last-ditch attack, he persisted. Furthermore, he had refused to give in when Mirai pleaded with him to step down, fearing an early and cruel demise. Thus, he will not give up now. At least not until he finds a successor to carry on his legacy and gives them the best training possible. Given that his time was approaching, it's a strange thought. His surprise, however, is not new. He was aware when he lost one lung and his stomach. He was aware of his gradual sluggishness and his increasing spindly and gaunt appearance. He was aware of when he had reached a real temporal limit to his strength and when trips that had previously taken seconds now took minutes. It was just a question of time. Between his passing and Nana's, the same procedure of passing the torch had taken place. However, the matter's actuality is simply unbelievable. All he wants is to live long enough to witness his successor develop into the hero they were destined to be. Naturally, though, it had been nearly impossible to find someone who was truly heroic enough to meet his standards. Instead of waiting until his limit had been pushed so far, he had started to question whether he should have begun his search years earlier. His concerns, however, proved to be in vain because Mirai had just gotten in touch with him regarding the issue, much to his relief. His sidekick, or, he assumes, his ex-sidekick now, had delivered, as he always had. One of his interns, a bright prospect to inherit One for All, had been identified by him by name and face. Third-year UA student Tagata Mirio is vying for the top spot among the big three right now. All Might was impressed by his dazzling display of compassion, selflessness, and charisma, as well as his deft commitment to honing his quirk. However, that did not imply that he had yet to reply to Mirai. All Might wanted to stay together despite their rather acrimonious argument before they parted ways, to determine whether he himself could find a match for his peculiarity. However, that was an idea for another day. Unfortunately, as they say, everything good has to end. He starts to descend from the sky, almost as though he is weighed down by his thoughts. Even though he is moving quickly and with incoming force, he makes a controlled and accurate descent. He leaves very little trace of his landing. the concrete beneath his feet has no deep indentations or spider web-like cracks. He stands in front of the Musutafu City Police Department after landing. In order to prevent them from firing mindlessly at an unknown threat, he takes a moment to calm down and allow the staff inside to verify his presence. He finally makes it into the station, where he is greeted with the same kinds of applause and wonder that he had experienced only moments before. He mostly ignores them, but he waves and smiles as he usually does without pointing at any particular person. He then heads to the back stairs to the basement level. Finding an open cell, dropping the villain off, and having a guard go through all the rules is a fairly short and easy process. Nothing too personal or serious, he has a brief talk with the guard before heading out. By then, he would typically do one of two things. He would first be leaving the station to stop another villain or assist any needy civilians. That's the route he would take most of the time. Due to his friend Tsukachi Naomasa's presence, the other option is only applicable to this station. The man had been a continual source of solace, wisdom, and friendship ever since the amiable investigator had learned his secret. But All Might is aware of the detective's sometimes hectic schedule. It only makes sense. Tsukachi had little time to waste on unimportant details because the man's peculiarity made him a huge asset to investigations and interrogations. He wouldn't just show up without warning, no matter how much he wanted to. All Might had initially intended to execute the first option, which was to simply depart. However, the latter is justified by what he witnesses as he ascends the stairs. At the corner of his rim, a patch of color appears. A frown appears on his face as he turns his head to reveal a larger image of what has captured his attention. It's the notice board for missing children. Papers are scattered along its length. Some are clean and young, while others are torn and ripped with age. The board is covered in portraits of kids of all ages, their eyes looking directly into his soul with either joy or despair. He finds it unpleasant to look at. Normally, he doesn't even bother to look at it. He knows there is nothing he can do to help these kids, not that he doesn't care. He finds it difficult to acknowledge that he lacks the necessary skills for tasks like tracking and searching. His methods of using force to solve his problems are simply unsuitable for locating missing people. Don't misunderstand him. He will be there to help uncover a slave ring or rescue a kidnapped victim from the hands of evildoers. However, he is unaware of all the work that has been done before that. He deliberately ignores the board, which makes sense given the abundance of those deceptive ideas. What is different this time, then? He looks across the board, there. His attention is drawn to a particular notice that is partially concealed beneath another piece of paper. The child's portrait is only partially displayed, showing a single green eye and a head of green hair. He pulls the notice off the wall and pushes the sheet aside, exposing the entire notice. Born on July 15, 2137, Midoriya Izuku has green hair and green eyes. She is 173 centimeters tall, 70 kilograms in weight, has blood type O, and has super hearing. She was last seen on April 5, 2152, at Honmoku Hospital's Naka ward in Yokohama, Kanagawa. All Might looks at the boy's picture. When he looks at it, he becomes momentarily stunned. Two pictures are used to illustrate how a child might appear after years of aging. A happy boy, perhaps 5, 6, or 7 years old, is depicted in the first image. In the second, a 15-year-old boy is seen grinning, but something about it seems strange. The child in the notice has only been missing for a few months, but that doesn't matter. Why use a picture this old? Why not use one that's more recent? And why does this boy have such a familiar appearance? He is aware that his thoughts are not likely to leave him anytime soon. He gathers his bravery and heads to the detective's office. All Might knocks on the door several times before pushing it open and asks, "Tsukachi?" The man in question glances up from his desk stacks of papers. His face is plastered with a look of annoyance, but it soon evens out when his gaze lands on his guest. "Ah, All Might," he exclaims, giving an inward motion. Come in, come in." All Might begins to retreat. "Sorry, you look busy, I'll just come back lat." With a smile, Tsukachi says, No, it's fine. You don't visit enough as it is. I won't push you away when you're showing initiative for once." All Might sighs, "Well, if you insist." He enters and shuts the door, locking it. He approaches the blinds and closes them, obstructing any external view of the office. The room is immediately filled with a puff of smoke, and in a moment, the tenacious and fearless All Might transforms. Only Toshinori Yagi's feeble, frail, and defenseless form remains. "Tsukachi," Yagi says with a dejected grin. "Ah," Tsukachi says, nodding in comprehension as he sits down. "I take it this is a business visit then?" Not entirely, responds Yagi. He settles into the chair facing Sukachi's desk. He taps his fingers on the armrest and bobbles his legs as he shuffles around in it. When the detective asks, "What's that in your hand?" Yagi slides the paper across and says, "It's why I'm here actually. You wouldn't mind, giving me a bit more information on this child, would you?" At that, Sukachi arches an eyebrow. Normally I'd go on a rant about how illegal such a request is, or at least mention how many loops and jumps I'd have to go through to approve such a thing through the proper channels, though. He turns to face Yagi. Sukachi takes the paper in his hand and carefully examines the information on the page. "I'll spare you from that. Considering it's you, my superiors could care less. And I doubt that you're planning anything nefarious." A moment later, he gets up and walks over to his filing cabinet. "If you don't mind me asking, what's so special about this kid? You usually don't bother with these types of cases." When he hears that, his guilt gnaws at him from within. However, he suppresses those feelings, telling himself not to get upset over Sukachi's inadvertent remark. "Honestly," shrugs Yagi, "I'm not so sure myself. There's just something about the kid's face. It just seems familiar." "Could be because of your conventions," Sukachi commentally remarks. "I remember this case, you know. The kid's room is filled with your merchandise. And I mean filled. Maybe you've interacted with him during a signing or something." Yagi gives a headshake. "I don't think so." Sukachi places the manila folder on the desk and says, "Here." It is surprisingly thin when Yagi picks it up. There are just under a dozen documents inside when he opens it. "This is it." Sukachi gives a nod. There wasn't much on the kid, unfortunately. Delinquent at school, highly disliked by his peers. Didn't want for much despite the hefty sum in his bank account. And he didn't have much of a social life aside from volunteering in an orphanage in Camino. As conflicting that is to his supposed nature, and having a female friend the same age in the area. The mother was helpful and cooperative, if a bit apprehensive. It's clear that there was a bit of a falling out between mother and son. A few outsiders' accounts claim that the Midoriya's family dynamic became ever since the boy's father died in an incident with Dark Cesspool and Endeavor. The mother isn't a suspect in the boy's disappearance, however, considering a preliminary statement from the victim's friends in Yoko. "Wait." Sukachi pauses in the middle of his statement and turns to face Yagi. "Yes?" Yagi leans forward and asks, "You mentioned Endeavor?" A tiny spark of thought appears in his mind. He needs more, though, so he can't quite get there. Nothing that pertains to the case, though. Just that the victim's father, Midoriya Hisashi, was an unfortunate victim of Dark Cesspool's attack on the Kiyoshi Ward shopping mall a few years back. Endeavor and Vernon eventually arrived on scene, but they were too late to prevent Midoriya Hisashi's death. Sukachi continues to hum. "Any reason you're focusing on Endeavor specifically?" Yagi scowls. The small piece of information is all that is needed for everything to rush back into him. Every agonizing moment, the memories flood his mind. It's understandable why the boy's presence, no matter how small, triggered a memory. Now, however, knowing the boy is missing and having a name that matches his face. His body snaps back to reality. Yagi leaps from his chair and transforms back into All Might in a matter of seconds. "Toshinori?" inquires Sukachi. Yagi moves in the direction of the door. "I need to go." "So soon?" inquires Sukachi. "What about this boy that's gotten you so worked up?" All Might scowls. He reaches for the doorknob and turns, saying, "This is about him. I just need to make sure of a few things first. Then we can talk." Now, standing beneath the overpass, he recalls it. The same overpass as previously. It happened inside the vast city limits of Shizuoka 6 months ago. A boy was present, green-haired, wary, and with eyes full of stars. At first, Yagi was impressed by the boy's ability to dodge the sludge villain's attacks with such skill and dexterity. He acknowledges that his attack on the villain himself may have been a bit excessive. With all of that dirt and debris, nobody was particularly attractive. Ultimately, though, what mattered was that the child was okay. Once the villain had been apprehended, the boy started talking incoherently, and to be honest, he wasn't paying attention at the moment. He was too distracted by his approaching deadline and too naive to notice what was in front of him. As the boy asked him questions, his ignorance persisted even after the boy grabbed his leg as he leapt into the air and he was still unable to see what was in front of him. Actually, he can easily locate his previous launch location, and even though he wasn't paying much attention at the time, he can easily locate the rooftop they were on. The first question returns when you land on the barren rooftop. People with useless or villainous quirks and those without them are mentioned. He grimaces, and over 15% of those people, that's over 3 million, commit suicide before they reach maturity. And I completely forgot about that. All of this shocking and revolutionary information simply went into one ear and out the other. I haven't mentioned it at the agency or raised awareness of it in any way. Failure. He did not fulfill a boy's straightforward request. Failed to reveal to the world a boy's altruistic and selfless nature. It was all his annoyance. A little rough around the edges, sure, but nothing to the likes that you're telling me. You're lying to yourself. Was he? He reflects on all of his encounters with Enji Todoroki over the years. Every scathing remark, every brazen answer, every heated. His wife's constant absence, Enji's children's retreat from his commanding presence, and even the death of his other son in that terrible event. There's a lot of it, but I never bothered to consider it all. It never occurred to me that Enji is. Yagi gives a headshake. No, I just can't think that way. It's unfair to make such severe accusations against him when I might be misinterpreting everything. You're willing to stand by while injustice continues to occur? Just like that? It hurts him. When all is said and done, isn't it inaction that had initially landed him in this predicament? He inhales. His eyes scan the area, focusing on each piece of trash and gravel. He mentally relives the events, feeling all the anguish, rage, and distress that are now so evident to him. And his only thought is, am I to blame for this? He decides, one that went against his better judgment. But that's how much I owe the boy, I should at least try. There he is, then. Not All Might, the steadfast bulwark of optimism. For millions of children, it is not the symbol of peace. No, on that roof, there is only Yagi Toshinori, a helpless, desolate man who had cast a boy into the vast unknown after driving him away. Yagi hopes that Midoriya Izuku is doing well wherever he is. Half a kilometer away, on a jumbotron, an advertisement is playing. It is just one of many in the crowded square, which is teeming with people going about their daily lives and massive digital billboards that are playing overhead. For this reason, you should think about how your peers feel. After all, we are all human. Izuku has been listening to All Might's voice in particular for the last minute and a half. However, overall, such a restriction doesn't mean much because it's mixed in with other advertisements that are playing simultaneously. When All Might comes into view, he immediately grabs people's attention. Every time All Might leaps over rooftops or even just speaks during a news segment, he attracts attention, even if it is only for a brief moment. The same will apply when he makes an appearance on a public service announcement screen. All Might only needed 10 months to launch a public service announcement. Such a possibility makes Izuku laugh uncontrollably. All Might is a well-known national figure who can get favors from anyone, anywhere, at any time. Within days of his and Izuku's shared rooftop conversation, he could have had his message about the quirkless and those with weak and villainous quirks up and running. Izuku rejects the idea that the effort was made for his advantage because it took the man so long to take action. But I wonder what's changed. However, it is impossible to predict the true impact of All Might's new project. Indeed, the man is among the most powerful in his era, and it's an announcement from All Might. However, after so many generations of social enforcement, prejudice against those without quirks and those with less conspicuous and potent quirks is deeply ingrained. Of course, it's not that I didn't expect it. After all, that's why I'm here. It's a distant concern, so it's not really important at the moment. Izuku's attention is currently on something more urgent and relevant. To put it another way, Zhe is currently crouching on a rooftop, only a few dozen meters or so from his target. Kotobuki Akinari, a 26-year-old man, was born in the Kagoshima Prefecture's city of Hioki. Without a legitimate education or steady source of income, he left home at the age of 16 and simply wandered, using drugs and committing small-time crimes. No one who is particularly interested, that is, until a certain change emerges. He has been pursuing a 21-year-old Sakata suit, who was born in Shizuoka, for the past week. She is well-educated, well-connected, and has a comfortable job as a secretary to the Safety Commission's local branch, unlike Kotobuki. Let's just say Kotobuki has some rather shady plans for the woman. His proposed crimes would elevate him from a minor infraction to a cold-blooded, self-centered monster. And Izuku has become interested in that point. Oh. There we are. At last, Kotobuki entered a quiet alleyway that is quite large and out of the way, indicating that it's time to take action. Izuku gets out of his chair. He glances at the next rooftop and leaps, moving steadily in the direction of his target. He starts talking in the interim. Of course, not in his own voice. However, with an amalgamation. something that is completely untraceable to him because it is fairly androgynous in nature. Ah, Kotobuki Akinari, we finally meet face to face. The man looks in the direction of the voice, but nothing is there. He turns to check behind him, but when he turns again, nothing is there. He is unaware of the person observing him from above the entire time. Kotobuki screams into the alleyway, "WH! Who's there?" His knife glows an unsettling orange as he draws it out. And there he is, using his quirk, Superhot. He can use it to raise the temperature of anything he's holding that isn't organic to as high as 1000 degrees Celsius. But he prefers to stick to knives and swords. Strangely enough, the heat only becomes noticeable after contact with the afflicted object begins. It does not bleed off the materials he touches. It's undoubtedly an intriguing quirk, but nothing particularly helpful that other quirks can't more fully duplicate. It doesn't match my search either. Izuku again extends his voice behind Kotobuki's head, demonstrating the use of his quirk. Does it matter who I am? When Kotobuki turns again, he sees that the alleyway is empty except for himself. He shouts, "What do you want? You're making a mistake attacking me." Oh, a laugh. Am I now? He spins around, and once more, nothing. Is this because of that gas station you held up? Where you were nearly caught because a dog grabbed onto your pants, and you killed it? Only to cry about it later? Or perhaps you mean the fact that you seared the dealer's stomach a few months ago? All because you didn't have enough cash on you for another pathetic hit? The voices simultaneously reverberate from in front of him and behind him. Kotobuki is now trembling and his heart is pounding quickly. His clammy palms can hardly grip the knife in his hands as a gulp slides down his throat. Kotobuki says, Look man, I don't want any trouble." "Really?" the voice asks this time, echoing simultaneously from all sides. Taking that as his cue, Izuku leaps down, landing directly behind Kotobuki's trembling body. The sounds that would typically accompany his feet hitting the pavement are eliminated with the careful application of his quirk. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to target innocent women, Even without Izuku's quirk, which effectively gives him combat precognition, the man spins to strike, but the action is clumsy and easily predictable. Izuku quickly dispatches the man. He strikes Kotobuki's arm precisely, causing him to drop his knife to the ground, which causes it to lose its orange glow. While the man tries to strike his attacker, Izuku deftly sidesteps the blow. From there, Kotobuki only needs to land a single, well-placed fist in the middle of his face to collapse to the ground, his nose dripping blood. Kotobuki looks up to his attacker after he appears to be recovering from the blow. He yells in terror at once and tries to retreat. Izuku finds it difficult to comprehend why his appearance would provoke such a violent response. What Kotobuki sees in front of him is a figure wearing a black trench coat that reaches his ankles. He has a black bandolier across his chest and black combat boots on his feet. In the meantime, Izuku's long, straightened, and black dyed hair, though this isn't well known, covers his face, which is completely hidden by a highly customized full-face ski mask with goggles. Izuku, regrettably, lacks the time to consider the subtleties of such a mystery. Fast-moving footsteps are coming from the east. Izuku knows who is coming because of their relative distances from rooftop to rooftop and their approximate shapes. So Izuku just keeps going. Consequently, he speaks, but not in his own words. Using his quirk once more, he makes sure that his voice echoes in the surrounding air, creating the impression that it is coming from all directions at once. "Do you understand why it is that I'm here, Kotobuki-kun?" The man shakes his head fervently and shivers. Izuku kneels down next to Kotobuki and says, "HMPH. It's rather simple, really. I know everything there is to know, you know?" Izuku grabs Kotobuki's dominant right arm. "And, well, you have a rather bad habit of talking to yourself when you think of yourself to be alone, you know?" Kotobuki's face contorts in pain as he says, "You mean you've been watchy?" But his words are interrupted by a silent scream that never escapes his throat. Overall, Izuku is not shocked. When one's arm is broken and bent in the wrong direction, the man's reaction makes sense. Considering how close he was to the man, Izuku had good agency in stopping the scream. You'll end up with both of your arms broken the next time you try to satisfy your desires, so think twice before you start repeating your thoughts about that beautiful woman you've been observing. After a few moments, Izuku turns, just in time to confront a man he has grown quite familiar with since the beginning of his vigilante career, more than 8 months ago, and finds the man curled on the ground, gripping at his broken arm in agony. Eraserhead. Izuku stands motionless, his hands behind his back, his posture straight, his eyes never leaving the disheveled-looking hero in front of him, and he announces cheerfully with his quirk, the voice now restrained to seem to come from where his mouth is. "And it seems that you've struck again," Eraserhead snarls, glowing. "Whisper," he says, glancing around Izuku, directly at the frightened victim on the ground. The vigilante who plays with people's heads before he strikes. Izuku retorts, "And here you are, interrupting my work and appearing before me all angry and agitated, saying, 'Haven't I already announced that all I'm trying?'" Naturally, he omits the fact that this is not the first time they have encountered each other, nor does he mention that each time they have faced each other, Izuku has managed to get away, leaving Eraserhead with nothing but an injured criminal to take to the closest police station and another report to add to the pile. Eraserhead, however, narrows his eyes and crosses his arms. "By causing your victims to suffer permanent harm? And occasionally even leaving them with mental scars? And as I've previously stated, such measures are only given to those who merit them. If they are to learn to refrain from their heinous acts, they must be disciplined." His disbelief is evident in his voice as he says, "And yet your system of choosing your victims remains as nebulous as ever. Then tell me, what did this one do this time? Projected and forthcoming assault, rape, and potential murder of a female victim. You mean that you attacked him because he was allegedly about to commit a crime? And you caused him so much harm? Do you really believe your actions are heroic? Would you prefer that I hold off until the crime has been committed? Have I possibly caused trauma to a woman when I could have stopped it days earlier?" Izuku slowly shakes his head from side to side. "And you have a pretty weak foundation on which to accuse me. I can guarantee you that my information is excellent. Regarding the latter, who said I considered myself a hero, I am aware of my blindness. I am not blind. Or what you and your people think of me, anyway. And I'm a villain in that limited perspective, am I not? I am too brutal to be a vigilante, for that reason. I just want to ask you about your strategies, Whisper." Eraserhead scowls. "You obviously only want to target criminals. However, it's true that your methods are too violent and harsh. Therefore, if you could just spare a moment too. I've previously warned you that I won't go anywhere with you. Additionally, I won't loiter and chat for too long, which might delay the arrival of your reinforcements. Why do you think my response will change? When I let my guard down, I just don't trust you to not just trap me. Not with some of your coworkers acting that way. You can still turn this around for yourself, you know," says Eraserhead, shaking his head. "When you finally catch me wearing that elegant scarf of yours, you can say that to me once more. If not, you're out of luck, I'm afraid. I can't go back now because it's just too late." A typical criminal would have been apprehended and in Eraserhead's clutches in a matter of seconds, but with Izuku and his peculiarity, avoiding the offending capture device is as easy as moving to the side. Shame to hear. The scarf suddenly shoots out, speeding through the air and directly towards Izuku. Eraserhead's eyes start to glow red through his goggles, and his hair starts to stand up on his head. His plan is straightforward but effective. Deactivate Izuku's quirk to make his escape as challenging as possible. Unfortunately for the underground hero, this is a response that comes too late. Eraserhead's quirk is effectively impeded by the thickening smoke and blinding effects of the gas, which fills the alleyway before Izuku can even feel his hold over it disappear. The gas is tear gas, specifically, from the grenades in Izuku's bandolier. Izuku has all the benefits of home turf at his disposal because his mask shields his eyes and nose and he has a quirk that lets him see through the smoke. Don't you think that's pretty counter to what you're asking for? Saying you just wanted to talk and then attacking me? Since Eraserhead is essentially blind and is aiming in the general direction of what he believes to be his target, Izuku avoids using Eraserhead's capture equipment yet again, and this time it's much easier. The strategy is fairly simple from there. Izuku engages in some rather successful mind games. Eraserhead hasn't figured it out yet, but Izuku is inclined to think the hero will soon. This is the second time he has used the strategy, so there is still time for that. Izuku slinks away in the opposite direction, his footsteps muffled by the ample use of his quirk, while Eraserhead bids to follow him as he mimics the sounds of his running footsteps. Eraserhead takes the time to clear his head when he runs out of gas, and while he can still hear footsteps just beyond the edge of the alley's exit, as he turns the corner and emerges onto the crowded street, he sees nothing of the target he's pursuing, just cars and people, and nothing that would indicate where Whisper is. He is unaware that a black portal has winked out of existence, mostly out of sight and back in the alley's depths, and that the only remnant of Izuku remaining is the man who had initiated this altercation. As it is, Kotobuki Akanari remains on the ground, attempting to overcome the agony of his arm and the incapacitating gas that now envelops him. He will not flee, not with Eraserhead still alive, not with his wounds. Overall, it was just another day in Midoriya Izuku's life. Izuku sighs as he steps out of the portal, his feet landing on the ground and the sounds around him growing increasingly disjointed, then removes his mask and takes a moment to calm down, letting his quirk adapt to his new environment. Despite his perfect escape and careful handling of the situation, he can't help but let out some of his frustration even though he is no longer in danger. That man is getting annoying. Oh my god, quit complaining. From his lonely corner of the bar, Tamura begs, why don't we just kill the unkempt hobo and be done with it already? Izuku pauses before continuing, well, I don't think so, at least. I'll let you know that there's no way that I'd win a one-on-one fight with him. In any case, not if it's engaged in a protracted battle. You know, he's possibly the most well-known underground hero. And besides, Izuku responds, glaring at Tamura before he can say anything more, I'm not going to kill Eraserhead. He's one of the good ones, as I've already mentioned. And as such, you situate yourself in largely unnecessary danger, facing off against this underground hero who persists fervently after your alter ego, Kurogiri says. I must repeat myself once more for your protection as well as my own reassurances. I chastise you for running around like you do, Midoriya. You are eliminating possible supporters of the cause. Izuku interrupts, your cause, maybe, and advances to sit on one of the many open stools in the bar. Remember, similar goals, but dissimilar interests and methods, he says. I am aware that, aside from boosting my ego, going it alone would only make things more difficult for me right now. I'll comply for the time being. Tamura interrupts, yada yada yada, his voice easily overpowering Izuku. Yeah. We understand. You'll continue to deceive yourself about your true self. I'm fully capable of understanding my flaws of logic and the circumstantial position that you must be. Additionally, as I mentioned, you're dumb ass. I'm sure that if you ran your mouth the same way you boys. The argument is easily broken by Kurogiri's presence, and both Tamura and Izuku stop fighting, the former brushing it off and returning to his games while the latter turns to face Kurogiri. Getting Izuku's attention, Kurogiri points to the TV on top of the bar, which a typical customer would consider to be merely a feature of the ambiance, but in reality, it's something entirely different. Following Sensei's encounter with All Might, the bar was equipped with an antiquated box television, which gives the man the luxury of speaking with the bar without ever leaving his lair. Understanding Kurogiri's gesture, Izuku turns a dial to turn on the television before moving down the bar countertop to the seat in front of it. Grays, blacks, and whites dance across the screen as static flickers into existence. Most people would assume that the sight indicates a malfunctioning television or a lack of signal, but that is obviously untrue. Izuku puts his head on the table and says, Sensei, since he'd rather not look at the screen. Sensei's voice responds, ah, Izuku. His voice is still as enigmatic and intimidating as ever, and Izuku has figured out by now that Sensei enjoys a sense of showmanship. He enjoys putting together one dramatic effect after another, and that using the television is no exception. I see that you're acclimating relatively well. Since Sensei isn't opposed to spying, Izuku is certain that he uses the phrase sarcastically. He wouldn't even be shocked to learn about his argument with Tamura from a minute ago, and Izuku wouldn't rule out the possibility that the man interpreted the fight in a way that would have played to his twisted sense of humor. You could say that, Izuku responds tactfully. The screen echoes with Sensei's laughter, and I'd say that I'm right, he says. You've put a lot of effort into the role you've set for yourself. What are they calling your exploits as? You mean to whisper? I must admit, though, that your accomplishments are already impressive? However, we're not here to discuss that, are we? Sensei continues, just before Izuku is able to say his piece. No matter. I haven't reached out to you for any kind of progress report. All I want to know is, are you prepared? Izuku knows what Sensei is talking about without any prompting. I am. I'm glad to hear that. I like to cover my bases, though, as you are aware. So please, give me a quick overview. To the extent of, say, what a quick glance from an assessor might reveal. Izuku clears his throat. Michimoto Jaku, 16 years old, born to Michimoto Enzai and Kaori in the Iwate prefecture. Black hair, pale skin, and yellow eyes, thanks to some contacts made possible by Jiren's contributions. Izuku sighs, I still don't like that. Quirk. Hyper-analysis. Allows the user to quickly and precisely analyze things in the heat of the moment. It's too obvious. Sensei responds, but it's an easily provable skill of yours, claiming that you are skilled enough in analysis to pass it off as a quirk. You can pretend to be knowledgeable about a subject while still lying, which makes for an effective cover. And it's a sure way to get Nezu's attention. You'll be alright. You have committed your doctor dossier to memory. It will hold up for our plans. You should focus on your studies for the time being. The only thing I have to worry about is the practical, but I hope I'm strong enough to defeat a dozen or so training bots. I can pass the written exam easily, Izuku contends. Otherwise, it has been a waste of time for me and all of you to be here. If you're so sure, says Sensei. Any last remarks? Izuku shrugs and says, it's a little embarrassing that we can implant someone so readily. I'm set to take the test. All I need is a fictitious record. Don't forget that, among others, I've been cultivating this identity for years. The idea that he has a variety of fictitious identities on hand, ready to be used and discarded at any time, is frightening. All the documentation is there, but it won't hold up to scrutiny, Sensei goes on. You'll at least last a week if you do that. After all, if we want to avoid the rat's radar, this operation needs to be perfect. Sounds good to me, Izuku says, nodding. Are you certain that you don't want to attend in full? Sensei hums. I can adopt one of my more established personas. Izuku interrupts, I'm sure, but it's too late to take the hero school route. And I assume that has to do with you not being able to stand being around so many aspiring naive heroes all day? Sensei asks, laughing briefly. Something like that. As long as you understand the stakes here, Sensei says, dismissing Izuku's apparent initial dislike of the subject. Remember, don't let this chance slip. I won't, Izuku responds. This is just the first step amongst many, after all. He hasn't spoken to Sensei in a few days, but even with all the time that has passed since then, he still finds it hard to believe what happened to get him to where he is now. Even though his goals may have evolved since his younger years and he may not have had the same hopes and convictions as he did a few years prior, his entrance through UA's massive gates had been just as thrilling and inspirational as he had imagined. He might not want to be imprisoned inside a facility that supports the corrupt practices of society for longer than absolutely necessary, but that doesn't stop him from taking in and imagining what might have happened if his life's course had been different. Thus, he finds himself sitting in a huge auditorium that is crammed with would-be heroes. Instead of focusing his attention on memorizing and analyzing the numerous potential future barriers to his cause, or worrying about being caught, he looks up at the front of the room, and only one thought crosses his mind. Present Mike is awesome. Since childhood, he had been fascinated by the voice hero, and this fascination had lasted well into the present. Izuku's response to the man would have been different if the man had been one of the recurring causes of society's problems, but he isn't, much to his delight. Izuku has no doubt that Present Mike is the best option for his students and the Japanese people because his radio show regularly airs public service announcements and because the man frequently visits hospitals to cheer up sick children. Similarly, most of the employees at the esteemed hero school UA check off the boxes for what it means to be selfless and self-sacrificing heroes, despite their obvious disregard for the education of their students. Endeavor is a UA alumnus, after all. Izuku feels a great deal of shame that he intends to defy them, and if the circumstances call for it, he may even go so far as to hurt them. However, he accepts the unfavorable possibility that he must if he is to work toward improving Japan. He just needs to be careful not to go too far down the slippery slope, but that is a problem for another time. He knows every detail of the practical part of the entrance exam like the back of his hand, so Izuku shifts his attention away from Present Mike and pays little attention to what he says. If the difficult task of fighting training robots turns out to be as simple as the written exam, then Izuku has nothing to worry about, so he lets his ears wander. Izuku finds that revelation to be not particularly surprising, but he hasn't seen or heard a hair of Todoroki in the auditorium, which has a capacity of 745. It makes sense that Todoroki isn't there, as he was most likely nominated to participate in the recommendation exams through Endeavor's influence. However, to his immediate dismay, he hears Bakugo sitting in a seat a few rows behind him. At first, Izuku almost misses him because the boy isn't snarling with the animalistic growls he had previously associated with him. The quiet, almost pensive boy is something Izuku hasn't seen before, but he also won't be complaining about it. Izuku is glad he is seated far away from Bakugo, though he wouldn't rule out Sensei manipulating things to get him seated next to Bakugo, if only to irritate him or at least try his fortitude. Even though it's unlikely that he'll be recognized, it's better to be safe than sorry, and Sensei probably wouldn't risk the operation on something so juvenile, so that might just be his pessimistic thinking. Izuku moves on, but after he recovers from finding Bakugo, he almost freezes when his senses pick up the words of a prayer. It's nothing particularly remarkable, aside from the fact that he recognizes the voice that goes with it. In order to avoid drawing undue attention to himself, He prevents himself from turning around in his seat in order to get even a fleeting glimpse of her. It would be too suspicious if his attention and eyes were directed at her without any apparent reason, and worse, there was a possibility that she would confront him later to inquire about it. As a result, Izuku controls himself and focuses on other things. Since there is another individual concealed among this group that he should be paying attention to, he uses his quirk to look around for any identifying mutterings. Anything that would suggest Ultra Plus. Izuku twitches a little, reducing the intensity of his peculiarity. He is fortunate that the audience hadn't added to present Mike's already loud cry, or else he might have found himself sprawled on the ground, writhing in agony. Just another reminder that he needs to pay more attention to his surroundings and learn to stop losing himself in his thoughts. Nevertheless, given that everyone else is standing and preparing to leave for their designated battle center, it appears that he should focus his search for later. Izuku realizes he hasn't looked at the card at his desk and, after readjusting his reliable sound masking device in his ear, picks it up and reads the printed text to find out where he's going. It's Battle Center D. He remains close to the rear of the group, keeping his body as small and unobtrusive as possible. Of course, the group's main focus is on the enormous stone gates that Cementos had put up to prevent them from entering one of the 7 battle centers that UA owns. Izuku doesn't have to worry about Ibara spotting her, though, because she's also here. Just my luck. He had only noticed her when he was making his way up the bus's stairs back when everyone was getting ready for the test, and it was too late to turn around by then. He tried his best to calmly and swiftly pass her, pointedly ignoring the open seat to her right, and find a place in the back of the bus where he could quietly ruminate. When he saw Ibara for the first time in months, he was a vigilante who had carried out over 131 takedowns in his 9-month career, and he was crying at the sight of his one and only true friend. He had found it sobering that he could become so nervous and anxious so quickly and easily. I guess he always saw it coming. There was a reason he didn't venture out to other places and only patrolled Musutafu. Even though he had a natural affinity for the place and even went back to the bar almost every day, he never patrolled inside Yokohama. After all, there was less chance he'd run into Ibara if he simply avoided her hometown. He knew that, if anything, he might just draw more attention to himself, so he made sure he tried his best to blend in behind the seats. After all, he didn't look like his former self. He's wearing polarized goggles, a bandana, straightened and dyed his hair black, has a few freckles on his face covered with makeup, and even has yellow-tinted contacts. The only other thing that identifies him is something Izuku makes sure is hidden. He moves his hair around to keep the sound masking device in his ear out of sight. He wore it all to hide his true identity, or even whispers, because he didn't want anyone to figure it out, especially someone as resourceful as Eraserhead. He continued to stare, though, as an orange-haired girl sat down next to Ibara and they struck up a conversation. It was nothing special, just a few words of introduction and good luck for the impending test, but Kendo Itsuka sounded like a nice girl, and Izuku hoped that she could fill the void left by his failure as Ibara's friend. As it was, Izuku waited until the bus had stopped before leaving his thoughts, deliberately waiting until he was among the last passengers, which is how he ended up in his current predicament. He barely makes out the butt end of Ibara's words, which are muttered under her breath, as he continues to stumble between composed concentration and uneasy anxiety. I only ask that you help me during this difficult time and make sure Izuku is safe and sound, wherever he may be. That makes Izuku feel warm. She still thinks of me, which is good to know. She also appears to have grown a little taller, possibly surpassing me in height. Satisfied with his observations, Izuku makes the effort to shift his attention so that he doesn't stay focused on Ibara, but he almost regrets this decision because he can't stop himself from mentally cursing because it seems like he can't seem to get a break even now. Kaminari Denki, who has blonde hair with a naturally stylized lightning bolt embedded in it and an all-around vivacious if silly personality, is as recognizable as he is admirable for standing out in a crowd. He had been so focused on Ibara that he had completely ignored the presence of a certain other individual. But if anything, he's merely a secondary concern. Izuku doesn't have to worry about the boy. At least not right now. Right now, Izuku just needs to concentrate on not making a poor first impression. It would be counterintuitive too. Cementos's actions pull Izuku away from his thoughts once more. Instead of shouting the school's motto, the hero lets out the expressive cry. Start! And the wall he's keeping up in front of Battle Center D's entrance collapses into the ground. Okay. Izuku's quirk already detects dozens of robots emerging from specialized bunkers beneath the earth as he starts to run. Let's get this done. All right? Izuku coughs up something. When everything is taken into account, I believe I performed fairly well. I received, at most, a 90 on the written section of the test. And even then, that would only be if I had mishandled some of the trickier and more time-consuming questions. Or that in my haste to finish, I had unintentionally missed some. But I guess that something like that could have maybe, possibly, somehow, Izuku hums, happened. Really? With laughter, Sensei inquires, and why was that? Some of the test booklet's questions, such as, explain why it is frowned upon to use your quirk in self-defense, or, explain why vigilantism is criminalism, seem to me to be poorly worded, Izuku says. I mean, sure, laws, rules, and regulations are in place for a reason. Without them, there would just be endless chaos in a lawless and unforgiving world. However, there is a difference between idiocracy and stubbornness versus sensibility and leniency. Mostly because questions phrased as such serve to further the already twisted views imposed on society, whether overt or covert. As if waiting for a hero to appear is more important than self-defense. But that's besides the point, Izuku says, returning his attention to the TV screen. In the end, it won't matter if you miss a few questions, particularly when the exam's practical component is given more weight when determining a student's admission. Speaking of, I managed to strike a respectable balance between the villain and the rescue, scoring 21 and 27 points, respectively. Knowing what to look out for and that there were rescue points in the first place was helpful. By the way, thanks for that. It was nice to know that my time wasn't wasted and that my chances of being accepted into UA weren't jeopardized by my bloated urges to save people, but it didn't stop my worries from being a constant presence in the back of my mind throughout the entire process. As it was, getting rescue points mostly involved avoiding Abara. I wouldn't have chosen to destroy the bots over saving anyone. Sensei crows, not a problem, Izuku, but tell me, did anything interesting happen? Given the circumstances, something had to be there. After all, hero schools aren't renowned for being weak and inactive. There was, Izuku replies, after Kaminari Denki shorted himself by taking down 7 robots at once, I had the opportunity to help him escape danger. It appears to be some kind of all-or-nothing attack, strong but counterproductive given his post-attack state. Kaminari Denki. That's great to hear, Sensei thinks, paying more attention to the names mentioned than anything else. Developing a positive relationship before doing business is always a wise move. What did you two end up talking about? Izuku laughed nervously and said, well, no conversational routes were established, were there? Sensei huffs knowingly. No, not with his mind all jumbled. HMPH. Whatever. The plan's first step, which is the foundation of the entire operation, has been finished. I consider this a success because you haven't encountered any issues. Furthermore, there's always tomorrow, Sensei continues. Izuku had decided to wait before introducing himself to the boy, even though Kaminari Denki had arrived almost 10 minutes earlier. Extending the time before their meeting would demonstrate Kaminari's level of commitment and whether he will back down or stand his ground when the need arises. Making the boy wait would increase his anxiety and make him jittery at everything. Reactions of this kind are only normal given the nature of the topics that would be discussed. 15 minutes later, Izuku chooses to give Kaminari some leeway. The boy had shown remarkable resilience, exhibiting only his eyes darting around the room and his slow nibbling at the food he had ordered as his only nervous tics. Content with what he observes, Izuku walks into the cafe wearing plain clothes but with a sharp mind. He had made sure that no trap had been set up beforehand, of course, but that doesn't mean he should let his guard down just yet. Izuku takes the vacant seat across from Kaminari, the boy in question freezing as it happens, and without hesitation he makes his way straight to the third table to the right of the cafe's entrance. Relax, Izuku says, but he doesn't use his own voice because that would contradict his current disguise as Michimoto Jaku. Instead, he uses a tone that conveys excitement, articulation that supports his made-up Iwate upbringing, and an underlying high pitch. He could be mistaken for a rather effeminate boy at first glance, which is exactly what he needs because he is very different from either Whisper or Midoriya Izuku. But, I mean, Kaminari stammers clumsily, clearly taken by surprise. Raise your hand to stop him, and Izuku says, if you don't mind, I'd like my food before we get started. Oh, mumbles Kaminari, yeah, okay, what do you want, really? And you're off, my dear. The cafe's waitress shows up out of nowhere and places a plate of skewered dango in front of Izuku, who thanks her before taking a bite. When did you order those? Kaminari asks, glancing between the desserts and the Izuku. Izuku gives Kaminari a sly smile and asks, what do you mean? When you placed your own food order, you placed one for me. Izuku points to his food. And you expressly requested that you wait to deliver my food until I arrived. So, don't you remember? Blinking, Kaminari says, "No." Izuku laughs inwardly at the boy's perplexity and nods, saying, "Don't worry, I'll be paying." Using the opportunity, Izuku then activates his quirk, creating a sort of bubble around their table that prevents sound from entering or leaving, making it ideal for private gatherings like the one they are about to have. "Where do we begin now? Haven't I seen you from somewhere or something?" Kaminari asks, opening his mouth to speak but quickly closing it again. His eyes then narrow as he looks at Izuku's features. Izuku eats once more. "Well, recall that I was the one who prevented you from being crushed by those robots following your minor malfunction during the test." "Oh, that's correct." Kaminari snaps his fingers. He stops and says, "Hold on a second. If you're attempting to enroll at UA as a student yourself, why do you need me?" Kaminari, "I'm only there for a short time. My cover won't withstand close examination. However, you truly aspire to be a hero. Long-term undercover survival is possible without much effort. After all, if you already fit the description, you don't need a disguise." Kaminari lets out a sigh, probably as a result of being reminded of what he has committed to. "I suppose it makes sense. So, what exactly do you guys intend to do? I mean, I believe that if I get involved, Izuku interrupts, "Not so fast," saying that we must first confirm that you still make the cut. "During the exam, how many points did you receive?" A decent 31 points, I think." "You think?" Izuku asks, raising an eyebrow. "You know, during my last volley, it was a little difficult to tell which robots were which. Just letting you know." "Well, I suppose it's fair enough. Moreover, what about the written test?" Kaminari winces. "Kaminari, you'd better have passed," Izuku says, squinting his eyes. "Making sure you could actually make it into UA was the reason we postponed this meeting until now. If that turns out to be untrue..." "Alright, I tried my hardest. I know I might not be the smartest guy out there, but I wouldn't risk not trying my hardest." Kaminari practically leaps out of his chair. "Especially when UA is involved. Especially not with my mother's health at stake. And I simply..." Kaminari inhales. Izuku says in a calming voice, "Don't worry. Take a breath," adding, "I understand what you're going through. I was in a similar situation to yours once before. I am aware of the nagging sense of powerlessness that only subsides when one is determined to do whatever it takes to save that one person. Although there was less agency and a lower likelihood of long-term effects with Abara, I won't bring that up because I need to push the conversation back on track. But understand," Izuku adds after a brief silence, "that I need someone who's trustworthy and cunning. I can't trust someone who is too dim-witted to obtain the information I require or who will be doubting themselves at every turn. This operation is too important to take the chance of using inferior resources." "I'll be your man, then." Recovering from his earlier distress, Kaminari exclaims, "I can do anything you need. If you need me to be cunning, I can be. Or if necessary, backstabbing. Anything at all. I really need this, please." Even though Izuku isn't planning on breaking his word, there was no need with the doctor's super science concoctions after all. Using the promise of adjourning and even preventing Kaminari's mother's death still seemed scummy, and his manipulation of the boy's emotions as a result of Kaminari's pleading strikes something. "Then you're on board." Izuku caves. Kaminari is visibly relieved by phrases, "And as to answer your earlier question, my associates and I will make a show, attempt to head off our main objective without a hitch, and all while doing our best not to hurt you or your 19 other classmates all too badly." Although it sounds like a good offer and something to allay Kaminari's initial concerns, nothing in that wording spares the teachers from harm, but I'm sure you won't realize that. After Phase 2, you're off the hook. The main idea of your job is to assist one of my underlings in cutting off all signals to and from the USJ. You will receive more instructions later. And when the time comes, you'll understand what the USJ is and why it matters, so don't worry about it now. Izuku stops to make sure Kaminari is taking in everything that has been said thus far. After that, you can do anything you want. However, we anticipate future assistance if we request it, you understand? Kaminari swallows. That sounds fine and all, he says, but his voice and heart betray a hint of dishonesty. But what guarantees do I have that you won't break your word? Izuku pauses to consider that. It's a legitimate worry, after all. If a hero student is discovered hanging around with villains and aiding their plots, they will be banned from all of the nation's systems. I admit, says Izuku, not much, I guess. Izuku nods. It's not much, I know. Especially when the words are coming from someone you perceive as a villain. But, let's take a chance. I swear in the name of my ideals and in the honor of my true name, I will not go against the deal made between us on this day. But still, I hope that that's satisfactory. Kaminari inhales deeply. Your real name, huh? And what's that? Izuku answers right away. You're not privy to know as such, Kaminari. But maybe later, if you prove yourself. Izuku finishes his meal with another bite. And that's all for me. I am prepared to leave, unless you have any inquiries. For almost a minute, Kaminari remains silent, seemingly unwilling to speak, but as Izuku is about to get up to go, the boy opens his mouth to say, "Is that how you got caught up in all this too?" Izuku stops and looks directly into Kaminari's eyes, asking, "What was that?" Unintentionally, the words sound harsh. "I just meant to ask, Kaminari gulps. "You said that you would do anything you could for someone you care about, like what I'm doing for my mom," she says. "Is that the reason?" That's a complicated topic, and completely unrelated to the actual goal of this meeting, Izuku sighs. I guess I could discuss that. However, I would anticipate receiving an equal amount of information in return, during which we would discuss your mother's life-threatening illness in detail. However, that is not what you would want, would it? Kaminari shakes his head and looks down. Izuku sighs, "Didn't think so. Look, just follow instructions and stay out of trouble. Right now, you're plotting to commit a crime, but later on, your plot will turn into abetting and enabling. But do not worry. You won't regret anything if you keep your head down and behave normally. And in no time at all, your mother will be fully recovered." Fine, Kaminari sighs, "as long as mom is okay finally. I assume your boss will continue?" "Huh. As long as you will always be with us, you swear to do that?" "I won't betray your faith in me as long as it benefits my mother. I wouldn't consider it at all." "The truth." Kaminari jumps in surprise at the change, clearly not noticing the oddity that had taken up their table until after the fact. "Nice to know." Izuku brings down the zone of nullified sound, with the typical cafe noises rushing back in. After everything has returned to normal, Izuku shakes the boy's hand and says, "I look forward to working with you, Kaminari. You know, your analysis is really something that I respect. Do you know how many babies that I can make with your help? I can gain the attention and funding of support companies from all over." Izuku nods as he writes down whatever he can in his notes and considers how he got into his current situation. His first 2 days at UA were an experience in and of themselves, partly because he was enrolled in the business course, but more so because he had to talk to the girl in front of him. 15-year-old Hatsume Mei was born in Kyoto Prefecture. Possesses a small mutation quirk called Zoom that gives her irises the appearance of crosshairs. She can focus on objects up to 5 kilometers away without losing clarity or detail. Is a true child prodigy in the field of engineering, unlike any previous one UA has seen. Her only issues stem from her invention's propensity to blow up, which is probably a result of utilizing her peculiarity during the invention process in an amateurish attempt to achieve miniaturization. But given time. Just consider all the possibilities, adds Hatsume. Psychically generated personal minions, neural pathway connective power suits, portable energy-based capture devices, travel gear that moves in 3 dimensions. It turns out that finding a support course student to sponsor is one of the first tasks assigned to management department students. Before his teacher asked him for a favor, Izuku had teamed up with a shy boy named Samon Toyotomi who was good at making small arms. Hatsume Mei doesn't seem to get along with any of the other students. Her generally vivacious personality proves to be somewhat of a pain in the ass. There is no denying that she is a genius, but her approach is largely unorthodox. In fact, Izuku was the only one who was able to engage with the girl in a way that was appropriate. Which is strange because I don't think she's all that horrible. She enjoys sharing her passions with others and is amiable, albeit a little too much. However, given the condition of my peers after spending a short time with her, I still feel sorry for whoever fills in for me when I'm not around. Izuku can't bear the idea of overlooking such a potentially valuable asset, even though he intends to flee his position as a student. Thus, following some cryptic exchanges with Sensei, he devised a strategy. "Hatsume-san?" asks Izuku. The girl yells, "Yes?" and quickly leans in Izuku's direction until their faces nearly meet. Doesn't comprehend the idea of personal space, or has decided to disregard the possibility of it, which isn't all that horrible, again. Students in business courses really get worked up over the smallest things. Izuku takes a small step back and then goes on. After all, he would be taught to do so by the ways of proper conduct. Let's say that hypothetically, I know somebody with a whole bunch of connections that branch out into various aspects of society. If I were to say, Be willing to talk to them and convince them into offering a sponsorship to a support equipment company, WOU. Hatsume practically yells, "I'm in," as he quickly and roughly shakes his hand. Izuku blinked. "That's it? Just like that? I mean, we haven't even discussed?" Hatsume interrupts. "I get my way, Midoriya, while maintaining eye contact. Thing is, I can tell that you do too. So I'm sure that we can reach an agreement between my babies, you, and I, and besides, if things don't work out, I'll just make sure to blacklist you from ever receiving the future services of Hatsume Industries." Right, equally assertively ambitious. You have to be aware of that. We'll hash out the details at a later date if you don't mind. Just make sure that you keep our agreement a secret though. I don't want anyone knowing that I'm favoring you and your babies. It could seriously harm my business prospects if word got out, you get me? Roger that, businessman, my lips are sealed. Good. Now, if you don't mind, I need to get going. With a nod, Hatsume lets go of Izuku's hand and returns right away to her tinkering. Now shoo. I need to work on baby number 87. My hover souls will be just wonderful. Izuku exits the development studio after saying that. Originally intended for Hero Course costume development, Power Loader decided it would be best to move Hatsume's access to the room because of her propensity to blow things up and work through lunch, which was known after only 2 days of classes. But now that lunch has arrived inside UA, it's the ideal moment for Izuku to carry out his scheme. Izuku stuffs his notes into his backpack and leaves, having accomplished his day's secondary goal. Having studied the layout of the school with his quirk, he moves with the grace of a student who has been there for years. Izuku charted extensively, and the only problem he encountered was locating Nezu's cameras. Izuku is certain that there are a lot of camera shutters and dialing lenses in the school after listening for them. With the obvious exception of the restrooms and locker rooms, the rodents are always keeping an eye on everything. Izuku is currently headed to the latter of the two options. Too much foot traffic in restrooms is a risk that isn't associated with the much less frequently used locker rooms. Izuku only discovers one instance of a student using the space, and that is when a shy second-year student eats lunch in their designated locker room. Izuku proceeded to repeat the action as a test the next day, assuming it wasn't the boy's first time. Izuku thought it was a great opportunity to use a heavily modified stud finder to look for any possible electrical connections because he was not interrupted while eating his lunch. It took some device calibration to detect the fiber optic cables in the walls correctly because of the steel lockers. What solidified his present plans was the fact that he finally found what he was searching for. As someone pays attention to him, Izuku ponders the ideas running through his mind. Izuku will undoubtedly run into the person in a few seconds as they both proceed down the upcoming hall to his right. Izuku simply shifts to the left to avoid running into the unidentified figure, a move he instantly regrets as the figure turns the corner. You must be seriously deluding me, even though I am aware that he is a teacher here, among all the individuals. Eraserhead's hands are in his pockets as he turns the corner. Even though he is dressed as a hero, there is a noticeable sense of exhaustion about him that Izuku does not usually see. Compared to when he's on patrol, he sounds completely different, his posture and posturing are completely incorrect, and his lazy manner of supporting himself takes the place of his typically quick movements. It makes sense why I missed the fact that it was him. Izuku, however, resists letting his panic control him. Since Whisper completely covers his face, Eraserhead cannot recognize him in that manner. Additionally, he is currently speaking in a different voice, so that avenue for identification is also closed. Izuku doesn't even present himself in the same manner as Whisper, much like Eraserhead does now that he is a civilian. He then continues to walk with the same composure as before. Izuku can't help but sigh in relief as they pass each other without any problems. But that, regrettably, also turns out to be too early of a celebration. Eraserhead halts in his tracks and turns around, his eyes fixed on Izuku's retreating back just as Izuku believes he has escaped. "Hey!" Eraserhead exclaims as he follows him. "Michimoto Jaku, right? Fantastic. Running serves no purpose. After all, it's impossible to know if Eraserhead has hostile intentions, and Izuku is aware that it would be best to avoid implicating himself in any wrongdoing. Furthermore, since they are in a straight, obstacle-free hallway, Eraserhead can quickly catch him without his equipment. Izuku turns around, doing the best thing he can at the moment. "Yes. That's me." After giving himself a nod, Eraserhead advances on Izuku. Izuku takes off the goggles that were on his face as the man gets closer. Even though they helped create his disguise, it would be wise to keep his distance from any potential reminders of the vigilante Whisper. Eraserhead pauses in front of Izuku, his gaze following the taken off and tucked away eyewear. He looks Izuku in the eye and says, don't those goggles help you concentrate on your quirk? That's his justification for wearing them, anyhow. Correct. I can already see where this is going. And you're removing them so we can speak? They also suppress me from stimuli overload when I don't need to be analyzing things, Izuku says, the practiced lie slipping from his lips. I've heard that I need to watch out for the scruffy-looking man on campus. I thought so. Okay. Plan. What? I think. I don't mean to offend, but I want to express my own thoughts about you. I don't want my relationships with teachers to be based on insider gossip from senior year students. Is that correct? You really are something. Eraserhead sighs and shakes his head. Is there a reason you asked to be transferred from the hero course to the management department? Izuku sighs inwardly in relief, then lets out another prepared lie. Oh, so that's what this is about. I believe that I was not up to the standards of what it means to be a hero. He constructs the impression that he is unsure of himself by framing it as a question. The change was actually made to make sure that any possible attention was diverted from him. After all, the hero course attracts too much attention, extra attention that Izuku doesn't need for his mission. And regardless of the fact that he had actually accepted a position as a hero student, he would have a 50-50 chance of being assigned to a class with either Vlad King or Eraserhead as the instructor. The latter wouldn't be too much trouble, but since the former would require spending time in front of the perceptive and inquisitive Eraserhead, Izuku saw the advantages of moving to another course. Izuku threw out the option of general education because of their general lack of access to the resources that the other courses have, and the business course was the only other choice given his lack of inventive abilities. In retrospect, Izuku ought to have recognized the issue much earlier, but he was so thrilled about the opportunity to sit for the hero course entrance exam that he probably unconsciously ignored the apparent dilemma. The fact that Sensei practically burst out laughing when he realized his error proved that the man had been aware of the issue for a long time but had chosen not to inform him in order to play a practical joke. Did you just now? Well, let me be honest with you, kid. If that was your only motivation, that was pretty dumb of you, Eraserhead asks. Izuku shrinks inward and blinks, reinforcing his image as a boy who is insecure about his abilities. Why do you say that? Because you finished the practical in 14th place overall. There is no reason to laugh at 21 villain points and 27 rescue points. You would be a great asset to my class, and you still can. It's awesome that Eraserhead is praising my abilities. Izuku simply shrugs in response, keeping his inner excitement hidden. Well, if you change your mind, there's always the sports festival, says Eraserhead. It will require some work, but nothing that I'm sure you can't handle. Izuku stops himself and says, I'll keep that in mind, Eraserhead said. Oh no. Most people don't just recognize an underground hero at first glance. Fool. Hypocrite. What should I say? Aizawa-sensei. Is that all? Eraserhead, Aizawa Shota, Izuku corrects himself in his mind. Looks down at him. There is a tense silence for a few seconds while Aizawa stands motionless, and Izuku fidgets. Finally, Aizawa breaks the silence by speaking. HMPH. When your file emphasized the uses of your quirk, it wasn't lying at all. Izuku finds himself enjoying the fact that nothing has gone wrong once more. It's one of the few things I pride myself in, Izuku says, maintaining his self-imposed charm. Well, just remember what I said, okay? Aizawa says, I'll be seeing you, Michimoto, before turning and stalking off in his original direction. The boy finally lets himself relax as Aizawa turns another corner and disappears from Izuku's view. He doesn't sigh or slouch his shoulders because those physical reactions would be captured on camera, but he at least lowers his mental defenses. Izuku quickly turns around and keeps moving forward, and after less than a minute of walking, he enters the first-year locker rooms without any further problems. Izuku wipes a drop of perspiration from his brow and says, phew. Finally alone. He snaps into action, dropping his backpack onto one of the room's benches and taking out 3 items from inside. A collapsible high-energy blowtorch, his reliable laptop, and his backpack. He takes the 2 gadgets and proceeds to the area of the wall that he had cleared yesterday, where he is standing in front of a locker in the room's far corner. Given its location, the locker is probably going to be unused, so it will take longer until his changes are discovered. He lights his blowtorch, opens the locker he's moving into, and begins melting a hole in the front wall of the locker. After a minute, a large hole appears. Izuku makes sure the metal circle falls forwards instead of backwards. After turning off the blowtorch and putting it in his pocket, Izuku dashes back to his bag to retrieve some additional supplies, including a clip-on coupler and some network cables. Shortly afterward, Izuku starts working hard to connect his laptop to the wider UA network. Izuku needs to go through such a lengthy process in order to gain access to the school's systems. Wireless attempts to gain access to the school's systems have been unsuccessful in the past, but there have been no attempts to gain physical access up until this point. After a few keystrokes, files after files are easily downloaded onto his computer, and as the files flow into his own hard drive, Izuku takes the time to go after his loot. Let's check the results of the entrance exam. A smile is spreading across Izuku's face. Abara placed third, right behind Bakugo and a girl from Mie. I think of Tamura when I think of Uraraka Ochako, zero gravity, and 5-point activation. Izuku makes his way past the other students in the hero course. Now, who else do we have? Tokiyami Fumikage comes to mind. Dark Shadow sounds really helpful. His personal profile suggests that he is a Chunin, but that could be incorrect. Creation appears to be broken, despite the fact that Miss Yayorozu Momo has a promising background due to her parents' ownership of Yayorozu Enterprises. Tsunotori Pony and Rin Hirayu are foreigners, but Aoyama Yuga isn't, in spite of what he says. Oh, the peculiarities of Komori Kanoko and Fukidashi manga definitely have potential. Gah. Come on. There must be an aunt or a distant cousin or something, right? Izuku's eyes widen. Kamakiri Tagaru. Razor sharp might be just what I'm looking for. Izuku growls. He shakes his head. Something to look for late. He looks at a different file. The heck? Since when has the UA barrier been able to turn the entirety of the school into a literal fortress? But his surprise is cut short when his quirk notices something out of the blue. In particular, someone, small, moving through the open area just above the ceiling with ease and speed, and they're heading directly for him. He is hit with realization with full force. What a waste, however, Nezu should be in Battle Center E Training 3A. Since the files have already finished downloading, Izuku quickly unplugs his laptop from the wall, slams it shut, and stuffs the rest of his devices into his pockets. Nezu has already traveled twice as far as when Izuku first sensed him, and the process only takes 10 seconds. He doesn't have time to remove himself from the room as it is. Izuku finds himself grateful that human-sized lockers are still used throughout UA. Izuku enters the locker he was just working in, cradles his laptop against his chest, and then silently closes the door. He creates a zone of muffled sound around himself and ducks as far down as he can, his size guaranteeing that he won't be seen through the locker door's vents. Additionally, it was just in time. Even though Izuku can't see it, he can still hear Nezu's small body drop from the ceiling and thud softly to the tiled floor. Fuck off. Now I'm screwed. It would be better to dig my grave now. Nezu hums as he looks around the space. He looks away, and Nezu starts to move to his left. In the background, he hears the principal stumbling up a bench, to which Izuku laughs. But when he hears the rodent start to shuffle around inside a backpack, that laugh stops dead in its tracks. His rucksack. It's unbelievable that I overlooked that, what a fool. As he makes his way to the closest locker, Izuku hears the principal leap down from the bench. He practically rips the compartment open, looks inside for a few seconds, then goes on to the next one and does it all over again. Shoot, shoot, shoot. Izuku picks up his phone and texts someone, using a brief but forceful message. Tamura. You had better not swipe this message away in order to get through your Tetris game or whatever, because you have to decide to use Plan B immediately. Izuku takes a deep breath and puts the phone back in his pocket. He can still hear the monster in a cute creature's body approaching from a short distance. Just one locker. One more. 3. 4. The campus is suddenly filled with piercing alarms, indicating that an intruder has breached the UA barrier. The intruder, or intruders in this instance, are merely reporters who have set up shop outside UA in order to learn more about All Might's responsibilities as a teacher this semester. However, they didn't just barge into a heavily guarded school by themselves, which is why Tamura acted quickly to stop them. Izuku breathes another sigh of relief, confident that Nezu will be lured away by the warning for potential intruders. Izuku thus listens and waits, and pays attention. Additionally, Izuku knows he's still here. He's still there, 3 lockers down, and he's not moving. Why doesn't he go? Nezu's ears twitch for a brief moment before the principal lifts his face, nose to the ceiling, and sniffs. I'm safe in that department, he says. Whoa. Nezu heads directly for the locker that hides Izuku inside. The door is jerked open without any delay, and Izuku is hit by the glimmer of light in Nezu's beady eyes. However, A small part of Izuku believes that this need not be the end. Izuku dropped the bubble of nullified sound first, right before Nezu yanked the door open and made himself known. Izuku had adjusted his face as the second action he took prior to the door opening. Instead of displaying fear, his face displays relief and a hint of retreated anxiety. He positions himself in such a way that his torso covers the hole in the wall, and he moves his feet to cover the circle of cut metal. All he wants is for it to be sufficient. Izuku shouts, "Oh, Principal Nezu," with excitement and satisfaction in his voice. "You found me, thank you, thank you, thank you." Nezu's head tilts. He laughs and rubs the underside of his chin. "Well, I must admit that it is a rarity these days, seeing a student stuffed into a locker. I was certain that old trope had died out around the 2030s. Though, please do explain to a philomath like myself. Why didn't you call out to me when I arrived?" Izuku rubs one arm and turns his head away. I just thought that you were someone else, is all. I was going to say something. But then those alarms started sounding and then I was scared and I didn't want to get in trouble or anything and then Nezu cuts in. "How about starting with how you got stuck in there? I find it always best to start at the beginning. Less chance of muddling up the details and all." Izuku murmurs, "Of course," and nods shakily. I was shoved in here by some guy. I don't know how he snuck up on me. Must have had the help of somebody with some sort of concealment quirk or something. I don't know his name either. Just that he's blonde and has some sort of explosion quirk." The things were sparking from his hands like firecrackers. Nezu asks with a laugh, "That so?" And Izuku can't help but shiver at the sound. "Michimoto Jaku is your name, if I remember correctly, yes?" Izuku nods quickly. In return, Nezu nods in a manner that Izuku finds difficult to understand. It's almost like a combination of resignation and approval. Nezu smiles. "I must admit, you're good, and to prevent any sort of misunderstanding, yes, I am referring to your acting." Izuku feels ice fall down his back. Nezu goes on, "You would have fooled any other skilled investigator, unfortunately for you. I'm not just so run-of-the-mill investigative pundit. And in case you do want to know, despite how well your attempts to morph them were, it was your micro-expressions that gave you away." Izuku only realizes now that Nezu hasn't moved away from the locker yet, effectively trapping him inside that space. Izuku knows logically that he could drop-kick the principal with ease. But naturally, Izuku is aware that, aside from Sensei himself, the bear-dog-mouse hybrid is possibly the most dangerous creature he has encountered to date. Nezu clarifies, "I checked your records, you know, well, I check the records of all my students, really. I usually start with the hero course students, move down the support course, move to general studies from there, and then to the management department. But you interested me. So I moved your files up a bit, just to sat my curiosity, and do you know what I found?" Izuku swallows. "I found an empty shell of a boy. For one, your admissions of the schools you've supposedly attended are all genuine, but nobody on staff at those schools recall ever seeing you. Second, the fabricated existence of Michimoto Enzai and Kaori. Bank accounts, property sales, salaries, and taxes. Everything fit. Except for the fact that, again, nobody has ever recalled their actual existence. All in all, I must admit my admiration for whoever is backing you. For 15 years you've existed, but haven't existed at the same time. Quite the paradox, don't you think? Okay. This continues until the standard USJ procedure. I only missed it by one day, at least." "Tamura," Izuku says, forming his voice just outside UA's campus, right next to Tamura's ear. "I've been compromised. Tell Kurogiri to track my phone signal for coordinates." He listens to Tamura laugh. "Failed to complete even one stealth mission? With a cardboard box, I'm willing to wager that I could have performed better than you. In any case, how difficult could it be? You would think." Tamura. Okay, just wait a minute. You done with whatever it is you were doing?" Izuku's gaze is fixed on Nezu's form as he abruptly returns to the present. "Looks like you are. Hope that you don't mind us getting started then, tea time is coming up, after all." Izuku's quirk allows him to sense the impending attack before it has even started to properly ramp up, even though he is unable to process the words in time. As it is, Izuku can hardly raise his laptop to deflect a blow that is headed directly for his groin. Nezu hums as he looks into Izuku's eyes from his stopped paw. "I will admit that I was attempting a cheap shot, but can you blame me? The look on your face would have been priceless if my open paw strike were to have connected, I mean." Izuku tries, but fails, to kick Nezu. Izuku takes comfort in the fact that he can move freely, while Nezu can easily dodge out of the way of the attack. He then makes a move, breaking out of the locker's walls in a manner intended to level the playing field. That is, if he can do that at all. Nezu says, rude, as he looks down at Izuku from a bench. How am I supposed to monologue if? This time, Nezu is the one to stop himself as he rushes ahead. Once more, Izuku recognizes the attack for what it is and blocks it using his laptop. Since the laptop is made to last, he has no problem using it as a makeshift shield. No matter how much force appears to be behind them, a few hits from someone Nezu's size won't cut it. After his unsuccessful attack, Nezu recovers and advances backward until he is once again a respectable distance away from his opponent. Hums Nezu. Your reaction speed is much faster than what's capable for a baseline human. Enhanced senses may perhaps? Is it combat precognition? Or maybe it's just rigorous, back-breaking training that has unleashed the generational perks of being born in the age of quirks? Once more, Nezu banks forward, but Izuku uses his laptop to block it. Kurogiri, hurry up! How come this is taking so long? And my Ridgepaw has been rendered useless as well, Nezu thinks. It must be something else. Emitter, most likely. Utilization of airwaves, or the enactment of slow motion. You move before your eyes should be able to decipher what you're seeing, and your micro-expressions do change long before I'm about to strike. Down here, he's dissecting me. It won't be long before. Why in the world does he have a rubber bouncy ball? Nezu laughs and takes the tiny yellow orb out of his breast pocket, asking himself, why do I have this? You're currently mentally asking yourself? For situations exactly like this, of course. When Nezu tosses the ball against the wall, it inevitably bounces off the wall and hits something else. This particular rubber toy ball, however, continues to bounce after the second or third bounce, in contrast to most others. It simply continues on and on and on. The same goes for this handful of dust and sand. Izuku's eyes go wide with astonishment. Considering the nature of Nezu's upcoming attack, he cannot simply dodge. Izuku makes an effort to shield his eyes. However, it's too late. When the particles get to Izuku's eyes, they nearly cause him to stagger back, rendering him blind. He immediately straightens out, though, and assumes another combat position that is ready. Since he can still hear with his quirk, he doesn't need to panic. Speaking of, he dodges the bouncing yellow ball as it flies over his head, just in time to avoid it. Oh ho! Shouts Nezu. You're blinded, and yet you still dodge. I got it. I presume then that your quirk involves sound-based perception of your surroundings, then? Izuku flinches. When Nezu crosses his arms, he says, huh? Your face says it all. And based on your interaction with Shota from earlier, and yes, I did indeed see that through the cameras. Your whisper, I'm assuming? Izuku remains silent. However, it seems that his silence is sufficient evidence. Interesting, claims Nezu. Now, just what would a vigilante want with Yue's files, Izuku does not speak. He prepares for another blow, but just as he does, Kurogiri's trademark purple swirls appear behind him. Oh phooey! Exclaims Nezu, just when it was getting fun. Without a second's hesitation, Izuku backsteps into the portal. Nezu's last words, toodles then, reverberate throughout. Hope you come back and play with me again, Mr. Whisper. Naturally, Nezu doesn't follow through. The portal disappears shortly after. Meanwhile, Izuku finds himself inside the bar's walls and falls on his butt. After making sure he is holding his laptop in his arms, he finally gives himself permission to take a quick break. But the instant an unwanted smirking face enters his field of vision, his sense of relief is dashed. Guess this means that you're done playing hero now, huh? Tamura responds. Izuku snarls. Not another word. I still can't believe that you got beaten by a rat. It's pathetic. Hey, you weren't there. You don't even know what happened. I know that you retreated from fighting someone half your height. Izuku snarls. If you'd done your research, you'd understand what I was going against. Tamura laughs. Why would I waste my time learning about a side character? Oh, I don't know. How about the fact that said side character is solely responsible for the entire dismantlement of the Yakuza presence in all of Musutafu? All because their members couldn't influence his students? Oh yeah. And then there's all the documented evidence that he could destroy a city in the span of a few hours with a single swing of a wrecking ball? And have you maybe considered the fact that he constantly fluctuates among the ranks of the top 5 most intelligent individuals in the world? Tamura laughs out loud. You're using the dying remnants of the Yakuza in comparison to what I can do. And please, 20+ intelligence won't do the rat any good if I touch him. Just a grab and then poof. No rat. Izuku protests. You try fighting him next time then. I'll make sure to watch from the side and let you suffer. See how you like it. I will like it, smiles Tamura in response. I'll show you up, and even better, you get to watch me one-up you. The only reason I got out of there was because he let me. He was playing with me, if it was that easy. Ahem. Tamura uses that as an opportunity to move back into his corner and defuse the situation, for his own gain. Izuku, however, draws in a breath. Right. He turns to face Kurogiri, who is standing patiently behind the counter of the bar. Sorry about that. According to Kurogiri, it is nothing that I am not already accustomed to. The harmless little feud between the two of you is nothing new. It is something that has been long going, and normally I would be fine relishing in the chaos. But as you know, today is different. I suppose, Izuku says, massaging his neck. Guess Sensei is waiting for me? Kurogiri gestures toward the TV and nods. Izuku then approaches the gadget, settles into the seat in front of it, and flips it on. Through the static, Sensei's gravelly voice says, So, Izuku. Tell me, what exactly happened? Izuku has an idea about how to react to a question like that. What do you know? Well, Izuku starts out by saying, I guess I should say that you didn't give Nezu enough credit. A pause. Excuse me? I told you that he'd catch on, that the profile we were setting for me was too on the nose, Izuku replies. Nezu caught on. He looked up my records earlier than he would have other students, just because some things about me interested him. It was because of that he was ready for me when I began to breach the school's systems. That's a partial lie, of course. I was probably caught for other reasons besides his early perusal. After all, the principal is probably much more connected to his security systems than most people can be, based only on how quickly he responded to my hacks. However, what can be expected from someone who is so unpredictable? Sensei hums. I suppose that I should apologize for the transgression. I don't think he's sincere about that, for some reason. However, I can't really use my typical techniques to determine whether he's lying when his voice is coming from a television. Sensei asks, and what of the data? As anticipated. I got it all, declares Izuku. And the good news is that Nezu likely has no idea what we were after, considering the fact that I took everything. Nezu may be a genius, but that's still a lot of data to go through to consider what the vigilante whisper might want. He has no idea the league exists, after all. As a result, Izuku goes on, Yue, and I mean specifically Nezu, won't have the time or foresight to reschedule 1A's scheduled field trip to the unforeseen simulation joint tomorrow. Nezu might attach an extra teacher or two just in case, but that's the most he'll go ahead to change up if we base my assumptions on past patterns I've observed from him. He's just too prideful to admit to his failings. Very good, notes Sensei. Another pause occurs. This is enough, you know. The extra effort that you're going through tonight isn't necessary in the grand scheme of things. I need more info if I want to send a message, Izuku responds. And the info I need isn't hidden within Yue's databases. You know this. According to Sensei, I do, don't I? Very well. Go on ahead, Izuku. Tamura and Kurogiri will be waiting for you tomorrow. The television flickers off after that. Izuku takes a moment to stretch before leaping off his stool, accepting the dismissal for what it is. He walks confidently in the direction of Kurogiri, who is already making a new backpack to replace the one he misplaced at Yue. Izuku says, Thank you, Kurogiri, and accepts the bag that is offered. I am merely doing my duty, it is of no trouble, but on that note, I do see that you are ready to head off. To Toyokawa, Izuku. Not yet. It's not late enough for that. In fact, I kind of want to take a break first. Oh, and where to then? Izuku has an idea? How about Sunaruko Park? A certain bench needs filling after all this time. Ah, it's been a while. As Izuku descends onto Sunaruko Park's verdant lawns, the remnants of Kurogiri's portal fade away in his wake. As expected, he hears the telltale signs of a familiar boy when he reaches out with his quirk. He approaches the lake-facing bench and silently settles into the seat next to Todoroki Shoto. Initially, there is a brief silence that is emphasized by the two of them concentrating on the views provided by the lake's surface rather than one another. But then Izuku breaks the silence by taking out a bottle of water and unzipping his pack. Thirsty? Todoroki takes the bottle and gulps it down, saying, HMPH. You've been listed as missing for the past 9 months, you know. Yeah, Izuku smiles. Don't mind me, I guess? Todoroki lets out a loud sigh. If you say so. I know by now that it's better not to ask. Nodding, Izuku says, Thanks. So, how was the recommendation exam? I heard through the grapevine that you passed. No surprise there though. Who else was it that got through? That Yayorozu girl, Honanuki Juzo with his softening quirk, and that girl from Saitama. Tokage Setsuna, I think. Todoroki looks thoughtfully in Izuku's direction. Your sources must have improved since I last saw you. Izuku gives a shrug. Well, I wouldn't exactly be doing a good job if I haven't been improving, right? I guess. Izuku grinned. So, Todoroki hums lightly as he mulls over his ideas. At last, I met this guy, he says. Yorarashi, or something. He talked a lot. Why does that name sound familiar, Yorarashi? Izuku notices the silence and turns to face Todoroki. He continues, and he has a strong wind quirk, Izuku says, his eyes widening in recognition, and he qualified for one of the top spots. Didn't take it though. Izuku pushes his revelation aside for a moment and asks, really? Why would he do that? He's nice, I think. Or pushy. I'm not sure which. But he let that other girl you mentioned have the spot. The green one. Not sure why, since he took the regular entrance exam later. He passed. And he's in my class now too. He says that I'm his friend, apparently. Izuku smiles. When Todoroki asks, how about you? How was your entrance exam? Izuku's smile disappears as his mind goes into overdrive to project a bewildered expression instead of one of worry and panic. What? What do you mean? Todoroki returns his attention to the view of the lake and says, fine. Izuku lets out a sigh and then looks out over the lake himself. You know, I'm probably not going to be around for a while. And the past year didn't count. Izuku's laughter is strained. I left the water bottles here on this bench daily, didn't I? Todoroki's face assumes a gentle glare as she says, but you weren't here to talk. Or give advice. And the alarm at school yesterday. That was you, right? Izuku merely looks away. He tilts his head back until his eyes are fixed on the sky. Like you said, you know me. But why? My promise to you hasn't changed, Todoroki. Everything that I'm doing, everything that I'm going to do, will be to ensure people like your father stop becoming heroes. And you know how it'll look. I'll be labeled a villain. My methods won't exactly be the most heroic, and sometimes, people might even die. But things like that are required if progress is to bloom. That's just how it is when you want to invoke change in a species as stubborn as ours. Izuku lets out a sigh. But no matter how bad it looks, just remember, I'm building for a better future. My aim is a world where we don't have to worry about being tossed aside by society, and where injustices are actually dealt with rather than swept away under the rug. It'll be hard, and my hands will be tainted. But somebody has to do it, and why not me? And hey, because of this, you get to stay as a squeaky clean and marvelous hero. You get me? Todoroki scowls. Should I even ask? No, not really. Izuku gets to his feet abruptly. And I'm sorry, really. But it's probably best that we part ways here. So that our individual interests don't conflict, you know? Todoroki blinked. Are you breaking up what small hint of friendship we have? No, of course not. But Izuku interrupts, the head shaking. Just keep a heads up, yeah. I'll stay in touch, just, not as often. No daily water stashes from now on either. Todoroki inhales deeply. Fine, he adopts a determined expression. I won't tell anyone about whatever this is. I owe you that much, and I trust you. The truth. Izuku's face lights up at that. He gives one last nod and walks away. Izuku notices one noise in particular. He changes his attention, listening intently to the sound of a door opening and then closing. Exactly on schedule. He adjusts and focuses on his target by fine-tuning the subtleties of his quirk. He watches as Sir Night-Eye exits his agency, emerges onto the pavement, and heads directly east toward his house. At precisely 10 o'clock at night, Night-Eye did just that. Exactly, without deviation, for the previous week. In the same way that Bubble Girl had departed an hour earlier and has continued to do so for the past week. Centipeter is the only one that departs, and it always does so last. Though it fluctuates, he never leaves later than 2 hours after Night-Eye does. Whether Centipeter departs now or within the next 2 hours is irrelevant to Izuku. He is only interested in the instant the Night-Eye agency is vacant and inactive. He will strike at that moment, and after all the time he has spent observing and accumulating schedules, he will finally receive his reward. He has been hiding out on a rooftop in Toyokawa for the past 7 days, deep into the night, for precisely this reason. Just last month, while the last preparations were being made for the attack on the USJ, Izuku came up with this plan. Indeed, He and the League already had the advantage in their next operation thanks to his infiltration and subsequent escape from UA with all of its data. However, wouldn't they benefit from even more information? Wouldn't it be advantageous for All Might of all people to have secrets? Naturally, he had asked Sensei. Izuku was certain that Sensei had dirt on the symbol of peace because he and All Might were practically bitter arch-enemies. If only it were as simple as asking the man for the information. Izuku is sitting on a rooftop instead of in a more subdued location, like a restaurant or cafe, because of the man's characteristic stubbornness. Izuku is looking for information, classified information about All Might that only his sidekick, no matter how distant, would possess. However, if he wishes to obtain it, he must exercise caution. The investigative abilities and diverse contributions to successful police raids are well-known attributes of Night Eye and his henchmen. Should he stake them out from a restaurant so late at night for a week, his skill set would make him stand out like a sore thumb. As a result, Izuku made a compromise by taking a job on any rooftop that was only 2 minutes away from the agency. Within his quirk's range and sufficiently out of sight to allow him to collect information without ever revealing his head. He waits after that, and pays attention. Izuku never lacks something to keep himself occupied because of his peculiarity. One scene features a couple acting out a scene from a well-known science fiction series. In another, a child is attempting to sound like an adult over the game's chat feature. On and on and on. Izuku watches as things happen, and no one is the wiser. 10 minutes go by. He was the only one listening to Centipeder at 20 and 30. There is a lot of waiting and sitting around doing very little. Izuku, however, is okay with that. After all, there is never a dull moment. As in right now, when Otake Yuhiro is back within his range. The man's apartment is directly below Izuku's hiding place, which is the only reason Izuku has given him any special attention. In addition to frequently being intoxicated, he consistently arrives home late and continues to spew out random facts and conspiracy theories. Given the way his feet are swaying and the ramblings that are coming out of his mouth, it appears that today is one of those days. However, Izuku notices that something is different this time. He is accompanied by another man, who is obviously intoxicated and lanky and stiff, swaying and babbling along with him. Who is he? A drinking companion? A possible one-night stand? A cousin or a visiting brother? As they stagger into the elevator of the building, he listens, but all he hears are rambling references to octopi caring for gardens and memories of the Vinegar Riverbank incident. That's absurd. I have more important things to think about, so don't worry about it. For the time being, he ignores the two and returns more of his focus to Centipeder. As usual, he's at his desk, moving and organizing papers while sipping tea, green tea, according to what he previously told Bubble Girl. Everything is proceeding according to plan, and the agency will be empty in no more than an hour and 30 minutes. Everything went as planned. Then his thoughts change, and he instantly realizes something. The floor directly below Centipeder, away from him. Otake-san, thank you. You have been of great assistance. Izuku swallows. That voice is familiar to me. This is the 5,000 yen I offered. Goodbye, and enjoy your evening. Every trace of past intoxication has been removed from the gaunt man. After moving away from Otake, he's gone. Wah! Sir Night Eye himself appears in the doorway as the roof door suddenly flings open. What a waste, never again. It started as a rogue, hyper-intelligent science experiment, and now it's a future-seeing businessman? Hurry up. Izuku jumps to his feet, only to discover that Night Eye has once again vanished. Izuku uses both his eyes and his quirk to look around, but to no avail. Why am I unable to hear him? There is no possibility that he... Izuku spins around, his eyes wide, his hands raised to block, but there is nothing there. But I heard him, I promise. How? He has no time to avoid the hand that snatches it from behind and encircles his neck. Almost had me there, but not quite. As of now, any abrupt movements and you're out like a light. Now, turn around, slowly. The renowned Sir Night Eye himself, Sasaki Mirai, suddenly appears in front of Izuku. Even worse, he has nothing on to shield his face. He is susceptible to future recognition, which could undoubtedly be an issue. Night Eye's nostrils flare. You have some nerve spying on my agency, kid. Izuku lets out a frustrated growl because he can't help himself. You're kidding me. This is the second time today. Night Eye arches a curious eyebrow. You don't say? Oh no, a dumb mouth. Izuku bites his tongue to keep from saying anything more that might be construed as incriminating. All right. Relax. I can easily get away. They shouldn't be aware of my peculiarity, and I can use my phone to call Kurogiri without touching it. All I have to do is use the voice activation to get home. Night Eye snarls, "You have a lot of explaining to do, kid. Now, tell me, what's your name? It'll save me the trouble of having Centipeder look it up." All right. First, how was I discovered? I double-checked to make sure there were no cameras up here, even the tiny ones, and neither Night Eye, Bubble Girl, or Centipeder even looked in the direction of where I was. That implies I must have overlooked something. One more participant? A covert one? Or perhaps something up here? Are they? There. It stares at him from a nearby crevice in the wall, and he can just make out the faint sound of it. Long, spindly, and covered in many legs, it was only moments ago that its position was revealed by the way its legs rubbed against one another. However, it is unusually quiet for one of its kind. In fact, it is so quiet that Izuku has up until now entirely obscured its existence. It's a centipede or mucade. I made a mistake. After all, quirks can take many different forms. Kid, Night Eye interrupts, his grip on Izuku's neck getting tighter. I'm already being lenient with you because of your age. But you can only test my patience so much. So you either spill in the next 10 seconds or you're going to be out cold. What will it be? Izuku blinked. All right. Unquestionably awful. Even though I'm annoyed that I have to ask Kurogiri to take me away again today, I'll get in touch with him. Izuku takes a moment to think. However, I will have to deal with Tamura's taunts if I do that. Additionally, they will be twice as bad as the previous time. The thought causes Izuku to stifle a frown. Well, I'll try to figure out another way out of this first. It's time for another risk. After all, Night Eye values cunning and intelligence. Izuku smirks and starts, speaking with a rather relaxed expression. I've known for a while now just how notorious the Night Eye Agency is for keeping the full capabilities of all of its members a trade secret. But really? Centipeder can actually control centipedes? Talk about a surprise for sure. Like Todoroki, he must have inherited some kind of compounded quirk from his parents. Or is the centipede still a part of his base quirk? As in, there's no reason not to try, then. Izuku tilts his head forward, even though he must struggle against Night Eye's hold. That centipede next to us, hiding in the crack, it's a part of him, isn't it? Centipeder, I mean, parts of him that he cuts off and transforms, or something of that sort. Right. After all, a presentation can make or break, and giving your opponent a mental boost can help you turn the tide. There are moments when they don't speak to each other. Night Eye just looks at Izuku, his icy gaze glaring into his. Meanwhile, Izuku's form is suddenly chilled, and this chill goes by as fast as it came. Oh, I suppose it's a little cold tonight. Night Eye doesn't carry out his earlier threat even though 10 seconds have gone by and Izuku hasn't responded to his question at all. Izuku observes that Night Eye actually appears to be almost reflective. Night Eye eventually breaks the tense silence by speaking. What's your quirk, boy? Izuku gives a shrug. Does it matter? The hand around Izuku's neck suddenly pulls back to Night Eye's side. The hero just stands there, his face devoid of any trace of aggression, his normal stoic expression not threatening to break out. Night Eye gives a contemptuous grunt. Approaching the centipede on the ground, he scoops it up in his hand before making his way to the door leading off the roof. Get out of here, kid, yells Night Eye, and don't have me catching you up here again. I won't be so merciful next time. Izuku hums thoughtfully. I must know. Would you mind me asking how you did that disappearing trick? Night Eye stops. He swivels his head around one last time, glaring back. Don't push it, kid. Night Eye walks on after turning around. As he approaches the door, he gives the intruder of his domain one last yell before departing. Besides, there's no need. You'll learn when you're older. Night Eye then opens the door to depart. But while this is going on, Izuku learns of something. Izuku hears the centipede leap off and climb to the floor just as the hand holding it disappears behind the door. The creature is still there, watching from the crevice beneath the door as it closes. That makes Izuku smile. His words, "Don't worry, Centipeder, I got the message, I'm going." Izuku then takes off, leaping from rooftop to rooftop with the intention of traveling as far as he can before phoning Kurogiri for a lift. However, his mind keeps reliving the encounter in his head as he continues to travel farther and farther, particularly when Night Eye abruptly changed his mind. Well, Izuku shakes his head, wondering what he saw. It's probably best to ignore it. His thoughts are abruptly interrupted by a yawn. I need to get some sleep if I want to be my best tomorrow. I don't want Tamura to know that I've been beaten 3 times in a row because he would never let me move on. His thoughts return to that icy gaze and all the significance that lies behind it, whatever it may be. I regret not being able to get what I wanted, but I suppose I'll just have to make do with what I have because it's better than nothing. Since you're going on this raid with us, I have a fantastic idea for a new name you can adopt. What do you think about being the great Deku tree, given your perception of yourself as extremely wise and a guardian of the innocent? After giving Tamura a blank look, Izuku expectantly extends his hand and says, "Just give me the list." Rolling his eyes, Tamura says, Yeah. Izuku catches a flash drive that Tamura tosses into the air without even looking at it. Tamura complains, "I still don't understand why you checked in the first place." "I'm checking because I don't feel comfortable working with strangers like you do. Unless I thoroughly screen everyone occupying that warehouse in Chiba, I will not be taking part. And the only reason I haven't done so yet is because you didn't get this drive from Jiren until today. Escort missions are a little more annoying than fetch quests. If you believe I was going to make a special effort too. Thanks for putting in the effort last minute, at the very least," Izuku says, interrupting as he turns on his laptop and inserts the flash drive. Izuku ignores Tamura's subsequent comment, instead continuing to scan the long list of 73 low-ranking criminals. His initial glance causes him to miss the main players in the operation. Tesla, who will cut off the signals to and from USJ with Kaminari's help. Steel Bulwark, who will primarily serve as a buffer and stalling piece for the main group. Thousand Eyes, who will increase the total number of their forces. And Hanzo Sweden, who will maintain control in the flood zone. As long as they are paid, all four of them appear to be trustworthy henchmen, and their status as E-ranking criminals is irrelevant because they are almost certainly going to be arrested by the end of the day. Izuku sees it differently than Tamura, who would be unhappy with such a result because he views the hired hands as disposable and beneath his notice. After all, a cursory look reveals that all four of the criminals are people who have no regrets, no concern for the lives of civilians, and no backstory that would even remotely give them any sort of understandable culpability for where they've ended up in society. Izuku will gladly give them to the police wrapped up in a pretty bow once their purpose is done. After those four, there are 69 more people left, and Izuku starts working. Some of them, like the F-rankers Marshall Hare, Muscle Man, and Chomper, are not worth much more than a cursory look. Their records are largely spotless, with little evidence of putting human lives in danger and all indications of villainy for financial gain. Izuku would rather hunt down than work with others like Victor, another F-ranking criminal, who is impulsive, stubborn, and self-centered, qualities that could cause a catastrophe in the right situation. This is especially true when all the evidence suggests that they would prefer to put innocent lives in danger for their own amusement or just plain carelessness as long as it would benefit them personally. Victor is just one of 11 people who have similar traits, and Izuku pays close attention to each one, which leads him to a very particular person. The notorious E-ranker, who frequently visits the prefectures of Chiba, Saitama, and Kanagawa and is renowned for his cunning and ability to avoid detection by the police. The Invisible Wall. Abara's brief hospital stay was caused by the same invisible wall, whose peculiarity had sent Izuku on a fruitless quest for more than 9 months without any solid clue as to where he was. That is, until now. A wall of conflicting emotions bursts into his head. After month 5, when all leads on the criminal had been exhausted, Izuku had assumed that he had given up. The villain had apparently been so shaken up by Invisible Wall's altercation with Amber Aspect that he had gone underground, and he might have even fled the country. At the time, Izuku had hesitantly left it at that. However, now that Invisible Wall has made the decision to reappear and is right in front of him, he feels a strong desire for small-scale retaliation, not for what was but for what might have been. Abara might have been killed, left permanently scarred, or paralyzed. His conscience tells him to let go of a past grievance and label it as complete and utter tripe. He knows, rationally, that he should be the better man and let things go. That it would be best to let things fade. That it would be better to grow past things and learn to forgive and forget. And that the logistical part of him knows that taking revenge for something that never even existed would be inappropriate. His former self would have concurred. The person he is now, however, finds it much more difficult to let go of things, especially when he is in a position to take action. Izuku has a cruel, sick, vindictive idea that would satisfy his desire for vengeance and address Invisible Wall at the same time while he is finishing up his last in-depth analysis of the villain's profile. The ability to adaptably camouflage oneself in accordance with one's environment is the most notable of the chameleon's known traits and abilities, which are attributed to members of the chameleonity family. He was too distracted by all the baggage that came with Abara's injury to consider the implications before, but now that he has seen the information, he can't help but think, I need this. However, Do you genuinely want to continue down this path and succumb to the slippery slope? Izuku inhales. If I want to succeed, I must do it. It will be for you. It will also be for everyone. Izuku shuts down his laptop and puts it away, but before he does so, he takes a moment to put on the clothes that reveal his identity as the Vigilante Whisper, and a few seconds later he's in front of a slack Kurogiri. The operation is scheduled to start in about an hour, correct? Izuku queries the impassive figure. That we do indeed, Kurogiri answers, but why? Izuku, you mean to go somewhere? Yes, Izuku says, taking another breath. Now or never. I would like to visit the Chiba warehouse. I've looked over the roster that Tamura has compiled, and I need a certain person. Kurogiri tilts his head. If it's okay with you, may I ask what the purpose is? Just, Izuku sighs, shaking his head. Please, the warehouse? By nodding, Kurogiri says, as you wish. Kurogiri's peculiarity begins to take shape in the atmosphere, and soon Izuku is only separated from his destination by a wall of smoke. Izuku swallows. Would you mind leaving the portal open for my next trip back? This will be a brief errand. As you desire. Izuku thanks him quickly and passes through. The transformation is not instantaneous. The warehouse is nearly as shabby and gloomy as the bar, aside from the horde of villains there. If it weren't for the 57 pairs of eyes that had shifted toward him, the whiplash of changing locations when using Kurogiri's quirk would have been totally counterbalanced. Izuku supposes that he should have considered the possibility that his target wouldn't be present, and he almost feels that all the iron will he's built up would have been for nothing. 16 people are still missing, but that's to be expected given that the meeting isn't due for another hour. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how Izuku interprets it, Invisible Wall is one of the 53 villains in the scene. Izuku lets out a resigned sigh and pushes forward, brushing against the villains without saying a word and without a care in the world. Izuku isn't at all surprised by their reserved looks, and it's clear that some of the more intelligent people have recognized him. After all, Whisper is gradually establishing himself as the boogeyman of the criminal underworld, and on any other day, the villains, who outnumber him by a wide margin, would have attacked him. However, they would reconsider their initial response when he arrived through the distinctive swirls of Kurogiri's portals, which are now known to be used by the trusted Jiren. After all, Whisper's presence would indicate either that he is involved in this entire operation to attack Yue or that he is collaborating with the heroes and that this entire situation is a trap. It's not long before Izuku is in front of his target because the villains hopes for the former, and Jiren's reputation as a respected and trusted broker to the criminal scene thankfully keep them in check. Invisible Wall. Taking in all of the heteromorph's reptilian splendor, Izuku looks at the man's skin-tight costume and the knife at his side. It doesn't appear to be composed of his scales or any of his sparse body hairs. Does that imply that he can conceal himself on objects he touches or wears? Who is inquiring? As Izuku would anticipate from someone like him, a sharp, nasal voice asks back. One of your bosses. The crowd murmurs a little, and Izuku ignores the remarks, concentrating instead on Invisible Wall and his responses, specifically his squinting eyes and his now frozen stance. Clearing his throat, Invisible Wall says, "You don't say?" His tone has changed to one of professionalism and a little less contempt. So, what do you, want with me? Izuku merely spins around and says, "Come." Invisible Wall follows. The crowd parted for the two, and they returned safely to Kurogiri's portal after Invisible Wall paused visibly, or, in Izuku's case, audibly, for a moment before following, his footsteps softly rapping the concrete floor. The two were immediately returned to the bar. Oh. With contempt in his voice, Invisible Wall remarks, "Nice place you got here," giving Kurogiri a fleeting glance before returning his attention to his surroundings. Got any more stains to go with the atmosphere? Izuku turns to look at Kurogiri, ignoring the villain. Do you have a specific reason for bringing this person here? Kurogiri inquires. Izuku crinkles his nose as he says, "Another portal please." Izuku nods. Where to? Jakku City. Kurogiri's eye twitches. The doctor. Izuku slumps his shoulders and says, "Yes, the doctor." Without another word, the portal opens, and Invisible Wall follows the signal and passes through without a word. Izuku laughs. Is this what it's come to, leaving one hell to enter another? What on earth is this place? With his eyes darting back and forth as he looks around, Invisible Wall asks. Izuku would have agreed with Invisible Wall if it weren't for the fact that this isn't his first time here. To be honest, the doctor's lab looks like something from a science fiction book, with test tubes and equipment lining the walls and massive vats containing liquids and eerie shapes strewn throughout the floor plan. The place would understandably make most people uneasy, especially with the electronic hue that permeates the air, the discordant and exotic lighting that flashes and flickers, and the distant whirling sounds of metal against flesh. Izuku responds, "You'll be staying here for the time being," and stresses that you will receive additional compensation for your time. "Since I'm the one dragging you to an unplanned, lengthy visit with the doctor, it's obviously out of my own pocket." The invisible wall suddenly stops moving. "Doctor." "What?" he says, spinning in place. "I heard a capital D there." The mutant's eyes dart back and forth, and his initially relaxed stance is replaced by new, desperate motions. "Oh no, isn't that lab right here? I believed it to be a myth." Izuku scowls and says, "Sorry. I apologize. You vigilante freak. Screw this," scoffs invisible wall. "I'm leaving." His disappearance act would work on most people, but not when the person he's fleeing can hear every detail within a kilometer radius. The criminal shimmers and then vanishes completely. Izuku yells, "You're not going to escape this place," with a hint of dread mixed in. "Give yourself up, and I swear I'll be kind to you. You have 5 seconds to get out of that corridor." Izuku notices that invisible wall hesitates for a brief moment, presumably because his whereabouts were found, but the criminal ultimately chooses to continue. "Take care of yourself. Please don't claim I didn't warn you." Turning his focus elsewhere in the subterranean facility, Izuku finds who he's looking for in a matter of seconds. "Nomu. Please enter the entrance hall." In just 5 seconds, the sturdy body of blackened and hardened muscle and flesh darts from its hiding spot to Izuku's location. Even though Izuku strongly disagrees with the methods used to accomplish such a feat, Izuku can't help but be amazed by the grotesque sight upon its arrival, which is a true wonder of genetic and biological engineering. It's effective at its job, obeying commands without hesitation or error, but it's also unthinking, just a mindless drone designed to be a tool. Although it's not what I need, it will suffice for the time being, especially with Tamura's small wager in the works. Izuku scowls, his mind reminding him of what he intends to do to Invisible Wall. No, Izuku inhales. He will not be transformed into a Nomu. Instead, the doctor will extract his quirk, and he will be able to return home free. Even though he will never realize it, he will have made a significant contribution to a worthy cause. Izuku turns to face the tall Nomu, whose peculiarities of shock absorption and regeneration alone are sufficient to defeat Invisible Wall, not to mention its unnatural speed and strength. "Go get it. Avoid hurting people. Avoid killing." Izuku gestures in the general direction of the Invisible Wall and says, "There." The Nomi leaps from its place on the ground, leaving a trail of displaced air and wanton destruction in its wake. The flurry misses, as was to be expected. Izuku has a time limit, and he cannot waste any more time attempting to apprehend the criminal because of Invisible Wall's agility and camouflage. He gives an order using his quirk once more, but he prevents Invisible Wall from hearing it. 6 o'clock. 25 degrees to the right, 2 feet off the ground. The Nomu lunges forward with its open palm, barely missing. It's 11 o'clock. There are 9 degrees remaining, descending from the ceiling by 3 feet. The Nomu doesn't miss that moment, and the villain eventually passes out after being held tightly by the Nomu's invisible wall. To the doctor. The Nomu obeys. Holding onto the invisible wall alight, it slowly starts its journey deeper into the complex. Izuku, who is already ahead of the beast, is far behind him because of the Nomu's stride, and he reaches the location a full minute after the Nomu at his walking pace. The doctor, his hands buried in his most recent experiment, chastises, "Quite a ruckus you were making out there," his eyes never leaving the gaping incisions he's making on the corpse on the operating table, and his features show not the least bit of concern. "I was an intruder, and you weren't concerned? Despite the dead body?" Izuku asks, avoiding a full approach to the doctor and maintaining a certain distance from him. "Only 4 people worldwide, including myself, have the authority to activate that Nomu," the doctor claims. "Only 3 of those 4, including myself, are aware of the location of this place." The doctor raises his scalpel and taps it against his forehead, not flinching as blood splatters onto his features. "It's simple deductive reasoning, really," he says, adding, "Plus, all for one wouldn't drop by unannounced like you had. And boy, you ought to be well versed in all of that." Accepting that line of thinking, Izuku shrugs and chooses to continue. "So, I'm sure that you're wondering why I'm here. Since you've only been here twice since we first met all those years ago, I must admit that your presence here is a little strange. However, if I may say so myself, that mutant in my Nomu's hands is rather telling. To think that you'd go so far as to deliver an actual breathing subject to me for that pet project of yours. especially with your vehement insistence for electronic communication. The doctor puts his tools aside and backs away from his subject. He looks at Izuku for the first time since Izuku arrived, and his face displays a rather mischievous grin. What change? Izuku quickly half lies. I just saw an opportunity and took advantage of it. His quirk, Izuku says, pointing to invisible wall, is just what I've been looking for. And it is? The physician raises an eyebrow. Camouflage. Instantaneous and fine control over the whole body, perhaps to what he also touches. Whoa. Thus, his appearance makes sense, the doctor says, rubbing his hands together. Okay. Why do we wait? After giving the Nomu a quick glance, the doctor moves forward and says, You, put the subject down, gently. And over at the next table. I require plenty of. Hold on, Izuku says. The doctor comes to a halt. Oh, conditions, I understand. He appears amused rather than agitated. It was expected, if anything. After all, I shouldn't expect any change right away. Okay, list away. Izuku begins. I don't want him dead, tortured, sure. Must have done something to really push your buttons. But still alive and able to bounce back, Izuku goes on mindlessly, needs to learn a lesson, not pay with his life. All right? With a little laugh, the doctor says, very spiteful of you, huh? However, I guess it's not all that different from what you've already shown me. You personally orchestrated the kidnapping of 2 other people for your project, after all. You developed a scheme to make their kidnappings simple and looked for their peculiarities, even if you weren't physically present. Those 2 were. But I told you, Izuku curls his fists in rage and inhales deeply. Were criminals? He asks. A leader of the Yakuza branch that specializes in the slave trade and a scammer who defrauded his victims out of hundreds of millions of yen. For their own benefit, they targeted innocent people. Don't interpret my inquiries as hostile, Midoriya, the doctor says with a smile. In fact, I'm happy that you're getting more involved in this. When All For One told me that you had potential, he wasn't lying. To add a little excitement, I wouldn't mind having another pair of hands around here. You know, Johnny can only perform the same tricks so many times before they become monotonous. I'm not joining in on your work anytime soon. Oh, you say that, but I have a question for you. Do you see the value in my work? I do. Izuku sighs. I would be a fool if I didn't see their applications. In addition to providing us with a number of new advancements from the sidelines, you serve as the force multiplier we require. Additionally, using cadavers for all of the actual Nomus helps me feel better. Izuku frowns when the doctor corrects him, mostly cadavers, but that's the first step, acceptance, that is. Regardless of how tiny the sensation is. And even if you're not aware of it, you're getting used to it. Izuku doesn't respond in kind. Well, the doctor replies, returning to his instruments, you ought to leave if that's all. I need to get to work. You also do. Izuku nods slowly and says, right. Additionally, since you're already here, while you're there, take the Nomu back with you. You can see that it's all set up and ready. Prevents you from needing to travel back. And maybe then no one will have to bother me for at least the rest of the day, the doctor chuckles. Indeed, and what a thing that would be. Only if it's pure bliss. What about the invisible wall? Izuku inquires. So that's his name. Don't worry about him, the doctor asks casually. At my discretion, which will be, you know, pretty soon, I'll have him return to you. After all, your pet project is rather stimulating. He gestures to Izuku with his scalpel, saying, so hurry up and get more people for it, you hear? I wouldn't want to back it up any longer than necessary. I'll be here waiting, eagerly. The first thing Izuku sees when he exits Kurogiri's portal is a furious Tamura clomping in his direction. Where have you been? For crying out loud. This raid is going to begin in a few minutes. Out, Izuku says simply. Out. Tamura reiterates incredulously, really? Izuku snaps back, calm down. I'm here now, aren't I? And I brought the Nomu with me, he says, gesturing behind himself. It takes a few seconds for Tamura to react, but he blinks as though he is seeing the creature for the first time. HMPH. He turns around and starts to leave, saying, well, just so you know, it's too late to give that speech that you wanted to give to bolster the morale or whatever. With a sigh, Izuku says, you didn't? Tamura just responds with a scoff. All right. By now, I ought to know better. Izuku murmurs to himself, it's okay. I don't feel like doing it at the moment. After a short while, Kurogiri finally makes his way to Izuku's side and asks, are you okay? Kurogiri, I'm all right. Thanks for asking, but I just need a moment, he shrugs. No work at all. Naturally, take some time to relax, but keep in mind our plans. Preventing all distractions in advance would be better, wouldn't it? Izuku sighs and, yeah, forcing his expression to brighten in an effort to concentrate. It helps a little, but he still can't stop thinking about what he just did. Let's go. At the break of day, Bakugo Katsuki awakens as the sun's rays peek through his blinds, spilling over his sleeping body and jolting him awake. As the boy becomes more and more lucid, any trace of a calm expression on his face vanishes, and as he leaps from his bed, his features are marred by a frown. His hand instinctively reaches for his phone, intending to turn off his alarm before it even sounds. Once he's finished, he turns his head to face the window and looks down at it with one good eye. Damn sun. He rubs his eye to get himself to wake up even more, then scoots across the width of his bed and fiddles with his window blinds, turning them up so that the light is directed toward the ceiling. But even with the repair, Katsuki is aware that the harm has already been done. The damn alarm isn't supposed to go off for another hour. What in hell am I going to do in the interim? He is aware that trying to fall back asleep is pointless because his body simply does not function in that manner. He therefore gets out of bed and moves to the little mirror above his desk rather than trying to challenge what he already knows. His mangled and scarred face is the first thing he notices, as it has been for the past year. Naturally, his encounter with that sludge villain had not been without consequences. His right eye had probably been lost in the first place as a result of holding back the heroes and starting fires, so he supposes he could now freely admit that his actions during the incident had not done him any favors. He finds comfort in the fact that his missing eye isn't a major obstacle, aside from the fact that he can't see depth. Both the annoying eye patch he must wear and his propensity to miss certain people approaching him if he isn't paying enough attention to his surroundings took some getting used to at first. Like that obnoxious classmate shitty hair. Most of his resentment has subsided in recent years. He is aware that he won't be getting better anytime soon, so the best he can do at this point is make sure that his scar tissue and missing eye don't get in the way of his ambition to be the greatest hero. Especially if he wants to surpass All Might himself. That does not, however, imply that he does not detest the idea that he is some sort of cripple who requires assistance simply because he is blind. Damn it, I'm Bakugo Katsuki. I don't require the pathetic assistance of any of your extras. Doesn't everyone see that? Everything is fine with me? Now, the only thing he can do is think and think about it, learn from his mistakes and never make them again, and change the way he thinks about things in general. Something he still struggles with a lot. Katsuki lets out a sigh. His thoughts are nothing new. In fact, they have been bothering him for weeks or even months at a time. He shakes his head in unrestrained annoyance, trying to shift his mind to a less congested place. He snatches his eye patch from on top of the mirror. To his chagrin, though, his choice only serves to bring up another well-known stray thought from the recesses of his mind because, apparently, his mind isn't able to stop wandering today. Does my behavior cause that nerd to wake up deaf in one ear every single day? That makes his left eye flinch. As soon as the thought occurs, he dismisses it. He had to take responsibility for whatever happened to him. He isn't strong enough for himself. Now I shouldn't even give a damn. The nerd doesn't seem to be around anymore. I must put him out of my mind. Actually. Katsuki covers his right eye with his eye patch and leaves it at that. After it's in position, he looks at his reflection once more. He almost doesn't recognize the person in the mirror. After all, how could he have sustained such a serious injury so early in his career? How can I become number one if I can't even prevent myself from losing an eye? Bakugo frowns and curses the voice in his mind again. He turned away from his reflection sharply. Screw this. My plan is to have breakfast. He has an uneventful walk downstairs to the kitchen, but when he gets there, he understands that he is not alone. That's to be expected, if nothing else. After all, there's a reason he typically wakes up in an empty house. Bakugo Masaru, his father, shouts, "You're up early," as he looks up from his phone, most likely to check the daily news. Katsuki snarls, "It was the fucking sun," and heads for the kitchen counter. He happily scoops his breakfast, which is typically prepared for him, into a bowl when he discovers it is still fresh. Someone must have placed the blinds facing down. And you know how I hate that. If you moved your bed away from the window, you wouldn't have to deal with it, Masaru casually says. Even though he knows he will never win this argument, which he has had numerous times before, it doesn't hurt to occasionally bring it up for fun. Masaru goes on, "Must have been your mom," while sipping his coffee. She claimed she wanted to go to bed as soon as possible so she could get enough sleep for today, but she was a little rushed last night. Now that Masaru has brought it up, Katsuki observes that the house is surprisingly quiet for a place where his mother should be. Anyway, where is the hag? Remember that she's taking Inko to her appointment? Sighs Masaru. If the previous instance is any indication, she is likely to return late. With the therapist. Right. Katsuki laughs. Damn nerd. Still causing issues even after he's gone. When Katsuki finally starts eating his breakfast, which is natto over rice, he reaches for the idle karashi on the table and spills a lot of it on his bowl's contents. I know I've said this before, Masaru says, but I firmly believe you should take that karashi back now. You know, there are spicy things and then too much of them. The scene of Katsuki eating and Masaru reading the news with a sense of light, if unyielding pressure, is overlaid by an uncomfortable silence that is broken only by Masaru's grunt in response. You know, Katsuki, I know that the past few. I know. Katsuki slams his hand on the table. You can stop repeating yourself over and over again. He yells, his fist clenched. I understand, and the response remains unchanged. I don't need someone to stare at me and try to psychoanalyze me. I don't need any freaking help. I'm all right. Masaru takes a breath and nods in defeat, his face showing no signs of surprise or rage, as though he were anticipating this exact reaction. All right. So I'll believe you. That's all Katsuki says, returning his attention to his breakfast and viciously devouring his food. Fucking nerds, fucking sludge bastards, and fucking people who think they know better than me. I've never been better, and I don't require assistance from anyone. Silently, the morning goes on. I'm willing to wager that he has no friends. You must be the closest thing he has to one, Kirishima. Come on, guys, that is simply cruel. He may be a little extreme, but that doesn't imply he doesn't have any friends. But it must be real. Look at his behavior. His character is akin to a foul heap of manure, with its odor wafting through the air. No one would dare approach that. Katsuki nearly snarls back in retaliation for that particular jab, but he barely bites his tongue. Fucking dunce face. If he says anything else, I'll be hammering his face in. How about we ask him directly, Blast Boy, what about it? Damn ears, her and her nickname for him, and her fucking wire cords or whatever they are. Katsuki does growl at that. Ears, what fuck do you want? Glaring at the girl, Katsuki yells, does it seem like I want to speak with you? Whoa, man. She was just asking a question, bro, shitty hair interrupts, gripping his shoulder. Don't be so antagonistic. You have not been harmed by her. Shoving the redhead's hand away, Katsuki says, she irritates me. That makes shitty hair raise an eyebrow. Is there a specific reason? You can't simply despise her without cause, can you? Katsuki just responds with a sneer. Huff's ears. Really? I should be angry with you for almost blowing my eardrums out on the first day, if anything. But you do see that I'm attempting to connect. What's wrong with you, then? No one notices the small gulp that goes down Katsuki's throat as he turns his head away and looks out the window at the passing scenery. In response, Ears rolls her eyes and scoffs, ass. Kiro. I don't know how, but he'll have to work on that if he wants to be a hero, Frogface finally admits. When Wind Guy says, it is truly unbecoming and of a proper hero, he glares at him. I have no doubt that we can work on that, do you think? Shitty Hair receives no reply from Katsuki. The discussion goes on, but Katsuki doesn't hear anything that is said after that. He muffles his classmates' voices so that his gaze can wander over the passing scenery, and he can't help but sigh in his head. If only. It had all gone south quickly, starting with his creepy teacher shouting for everyone to leave, followed by the appearance of that black mist fucker farther down the complex, where Katsuki and the others were directly in front of the black mist. Naturally, Katsuki tried to capitalize on the situation by launching a possible surprise attack, but it didn't work, and now he found himself in a corner of the UCH or whatever the place is called. The villain, because what else would he be, started to monologue about everything. Furthermore, there is a masked freak in front of him, complete with a full black bodysuit and some kind of full-face ski goggles. Katsuki is certain that the person's aura and lack of features would make any of his classmates shit their pants simply by being close. But not him. The man is clearly a villain, and that fact only makes Katsuki more excited. He smiles at the idea of beating up some worthless scum for once, and he will be happy to do so if it means he has something to focus on. The first to act is the antagonist. I'd stay where you are for now, if I was you. It's not quite the voice Katsuki was expecting, perhaps a voice modulator of some kind, but not quite the combination of voices he hears emanating from the villain. The villain's words seem to echo from men, women, children, and the elderly. And what makes you think I'm gonna listen to you? Huh? Katsuki laughs. In 5 seconds flat, I could get over there and have you trapped in a crater in the ground. Do you believe you can defeat me? Katsuki's eyes enlarge, his hands reach for his mouth, but nothing is wrong, and he tries pronouncing a few words, only to discover the same thing he had discovered just a few moments before. He is unable to speak at all. To be honest, what makes someone so obnoxious? If that boy allowed you to walk all over him like that, he must have been seriously messed up. Boy? What boy? Katsuki narrows his eye. I can tell you're paying attention to me. Good, you should listen to this. The villain puts his hands around his back and nods. I won't tell him that, but he's putting himself in a precarious position for an attack. Remember what your name was? Oh, I see. You mean Bakugo Katsuki? That's what Izuku told me, anyway. He what? Katsuki screams, but nothing comes out of his mouth. He realizes his error and spits his mouth out, but he still doesn't know the villain's quirk. What if it was enhanced by words he stole? But his internal conflict isn't enough to stop him from thinking what he originally thought. I knew Deku was pitiful, but you mean to say he joined the villains? It's a shame that he died on the operating table, though. What? Katsuki blinks. He knew the risks, of course. The antagonist continues. Becoming a Nomu isn't a guaranteed thing, let alone as keeping one's mind by the end of the operation. Though, I suppose that I should thank you, in a way, hums the villain. The brief period of time I spent with Izuku was more beneficial to me than the years I spent being denigrated by society. I'll just say that his mind produced some revelations for me. I realized that I haven't even come close to experiencing the actual horrors of our society after hearing all of his stories about being treated like trash, having to deal with people making fun of his father's death in front of him, and the terrible abuse he endured because of his alleged quirk. I wouldn't have first-hand knowledge of a boy's perspectives and ideas if it weren't for you tossing him around like a weasel. Deku. What did he get himself into? And he's dead? Because of me? Katsuki shudders. You're correct. You realize that it's all your fault? After being told to jump off a roof and being made fun of by All Might himself in the same day, he came seeking authority and something to prove himself. I suppose it was simply too much for him. After all, everyone has their breaking point. The antagonist sighs. It's unfortunate that he died. Oh, the things he could have done with a mind like his. The villain sags, shaking his head. Well, at least he has helped a bigger cause, even though he will never realize it. You know, a piece of him still exists in me. Not only his beliefs or tales, but also his peculiarity, which I should add works very well together. Overall, he was able to fulfill his dream of helping someone. Katsuki remains motionless. However, that doesn't alter the fact that you were the primary perpetrator and catalyst for Midoriya's terrible mistreatment during his brief life. You know, I feel like I owe the kid. And if that means brutally beating you to the ground, then so be it, helping to teach yet another egotistical narcissist where they belong on the hierarchy. Come on, Bakugo Katsuki, the villain says, cracking his neck. You claim that you aspire to be the hero who outshines all others. Then demonstrate it. Additionally, just in case you need some persuasion or believe that this is all a ruse, you probably recognize this voice, don't you? Katsuki. It's a different voice that emerges, one that Katsuki is very familiar with and that is readily and unmistakably female rather than a mix of voices. What have you done to my mom? I seem to be able to speak once more. The antagonist shrugs. Obviously, nothing as of yet. It is not at all honorable to target your loved ones for harm. But you'll see if it comes to that. Please understand that I am only threatening to do so if you fail to deliver. And that's the last thing we'd want, would we? Nerd, I won't allow this villain to damage your reputation. That's at least what I owe you. Katsuki uses his quirk to propel himself forward and charges forward. The antagonist, however, does not appear prepared for the impending attack and remains motionless in his current position. He is a true fool. In preparation, Katsuki raises his right arm, holding back until the very last second. When he misses, he hardly notices what occurs. After dodging his blow, the villain manages to grab Katsuki by the right arm and throw him to the ground. Please. Easily predictable. Is that really all you have to offer? Katsuki looks up from where he is on the ground and sees the villain standing above him, staring down at him with anticipation. This makes Katsuki snap into action, aiming another explosion at the villain and propelling himself forward with an explosion in one hand. The villain makes a move long before the attack has a chance to make contact. As a result, Katsuki is stabbed between the ribs, causing him to fall to the ground again. He used to tell me of how much he admired you for your strength and willpower. the villain says, glancing down at Katsuki again. Don't get me wrong, he hated you with a passion. Though that didn't mean that he couldn't still have some respect for you, apparently. Even if it was only for your more positive aspects. Katsuki lifts himself partially off the ground with another explosion. He makes himself spin halfway up, his legs poised to knock the villain off his feet. However, the villain avoids with grace and ease once more. Katsuki gets himself upright. The anticipated retaliation never materializes. Instead, the villain stands a few feet away, his mask-covered, expressionless eyes somehow judging and critical. Shame that your indomitable will doesn't stand up to mental and emotional pressure. It makes you sloppy. That's a rather sizable chink in the armor, you know. Katsuki snarls. What would you? I know everything there is to know about you, Bakugo Katsuki. Whether from the word of the victim himself or through my countless hours watching your every move from the shadows, there's nothing I don't know. So please, don't chastise me with the old, you don't know shit about me. Because you'd be wrong about that. Plain and simple. In the distance, a real tornado of fire appears, illuminating the USJ ceiling with fiery oranges and reds. Looks like that's my cue. It's been fun, Bakugo. I'd stay longer, but I can't waste all of my time here. Katsuki's eyes narrow. He suppresses his urge to launch himself forward. He can't just charge in without thinking, based on the last few minutes or so. He may or may not have the time he needs to plan. Katsuki presses his brain, waiting for time to think, and yells, "You're just gonna leave me, huh? Don't think I'm worth it?" The antagonist laughs. It's a wonder he held you up on that pedestal for so long. I don't know what he saw in you. By turning around, the villain exposes his back to assault, but Katsuki doesn't aim for the opening. See you around, Bakugo, the antagonist's voice says. I have bigger fish to fry than you. In fact, rather than knocking you out, I'll let you go to aid your peers while I'm at it. A sneer escapes Katsuki. You mean you're actually worried about those extras? The antagonist hesitates. He turns to give Katsuki one last glance. You should heed the screams and bids of assistance of your fellow classmates, Bakugo Katsuki. Try to be an island all you like, but the path of heroism can't be done by one's lonesome. Katsuki complains angrily. Those extras don't hold a candle to me. This time, it's the villain's turn to laugh. I wouldn't be so sure. Don't be so hasty to discount potential allies. After all, who'll come to save you if everyone comes to hate you? Katsuki scowls. Shut up. After giving a small laugh, the villain turns around again and emerges in front of the mist guy through the smoky portal. Till we meet again. As Katsuki retreats into the portal, the villain turns again, his mask covered, lifeless face looking directly into his eyes. Bye. Katsuki is then left alone as the cries of his peers and the sounds of combat reverberate throughout the surrounding area. There should be a sense of excitement and temptation coursing through him. But all he senses is a kind of wallowing, covert disdain. Damn it. How fares the fight, Kurogiri? As the boy comes out of a portal, the smoke-swathed man looks to his left, assessing his errant charge. Well within estimated procedures, fortunately, tells Kurogiri. Though I am sure that you already knew that, considering the nature of your quirk. Izuku laughs out loud. You wouldn't be wrong there. In fact, I noticed that all the students that you were able to send off did in fact go to the zones I asked you to send them to. I thank you for that. It'll go a long way to pushing along the class's survival through our attack. To Kurogiri, your praise is unnecessary, especially when I must broach the fact that I was hapless enough to allow one of the students to escape to warn the rest of the faculty of our presence. Izuku takes the information in stride and muses. I did hear that. It's nothing to worry about since it works in our favor though. Iida Tenya is his name. His rank as 6th in the entrance exam shows his skill. It makes sense considering his heritage and with him being the younger brother of one Iida Tensai, who just so happens to be the turbo hero Ingenium. Did you know that? I must admit that I did not. Though, that is not surprising, considering the rather large gap that exists in regard to the amount of information you and I take the effort to analyze and memorize. Izuku cocks his head in Kurogiri's direction. Nothing that I couldn't help you with if you asked, you know. The two are silent for a moment before Kurogiri responds. That is, in truth, a falsity, young whisper. Izuku blinks, not quite understanding what Kurogiri is saying. What do you mean? Kurogiri abruptly extends an arm in the direction of Tamura and the Nomu, who are hovering over a fallen Eraserhead. The young master seems to once again be going specifically against your wishes. It would be best to stop him before he gets too carried away, no? Izuku nods and jogs away without saying anything more. I suppose that you're right. Thanks, Kurogiri. Given the possibility that Sensei's secrets are at play, he is aware of a dismissal when he sees one and knows better than to inquire for details. But that doesn't mean he won't remember the discussion for later. Eventually, Izuku arrives at a smug Tamura standing in front of Eraserhead's vanquished form. As he gets closer, he can't help but notice the stern look the fallen hero is giving him. Tamura, Izuku utters, his amalgamated voice brimming with frustration. Tamura pauses in the middle of his statement and looks at Izuku. What do you want, brat? Can't you see that I'm busy? Izuku lets out a sigh. Didn't I say something about not killing Eraserhead? Tamura laughs. I didn't forget. He's alive and breathing right now, isn't he? Izuku gazes down at the underground hero's rumpled body. Several of Eraserhead's limbs are twisted at strange angles, and he has cuts and avulsions all over his body in addition to punctures and bruises. Izuku wouldn't be shocked if the protagonist experienced multiple organ ruptures and internal bleeding episodes that ultimately led to his demise. To which Izuku replies, sure doesn't look like it. He looks at the Nomu, standing watch like some deranged death agent, holding Eraserhead down. Stand down. Let go of the target, gently. Eraserhead is soon freed from the creature's hold after the Nomu obeys. Tamura rolls his eyes and says, sure, ruin all the fun while you're at it. Will it at least make you happy that I get what you meant about Eraserhead? He is actually pretty cool. Izuku is unable to resist wearing a contented grin, which Tamura cannot see anyhow. Just as I told you. Does that mean that you'll start believing me about Nezu? The idea nearly makes Tamura roll over with laughter. Peeved. Ha 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 ha. Izuku lets out a sigh. Izuku's eyes drift off into the distance as Tamura continues his breakdown, his quirk having detected movement from the flood zone. Guess that's a no, then. 3 of 1A's students, Mineta Minoru, Asui Suyu, and Jiro Kyoka, are the source. According to his quirk, they managed to escape the wrecked ship in the middle of the zone by using a combination of Jiro's controlled shockwave, which created a whirlpool to group their opponents together, Mineta's balls to trap the villains, and Asui's ability to carry the 3 of them to safety. Taking everything into account, everything proceeded as planned. He's glad his faith wasn't misplaced because he knew he could rely on the creativity of those who could overcome the rigorous requirements one must meet to attend UA. Especially when one of them is a fellow bearer of a sound-based quirk, and especially one so potent, even more so than his in certain ways. Izuku yells, don't even think about it, Tamura, as he hears Tamura frantically turning his attention to the newcomers. Tamura mutters something. But All Might's coming, I know that for sure. You don't need to worry about all your entertainment being stripped away at the moment. The final battle has yet to be upon us, after all. Izuku pauses to think about something. Izuku does not want an unhappy Tamura to become unstable. Thus, he chooses to take a measured chance. Hopefully, I won't regret this. But if you really must flex those twitchy trigger fingers of yours, I suppose that you can go play with them, just no killing. Before Izuku finishes speaking, Tamura has already started to move in the direction of the 3 frightened pupils. I don't need your fucking permission, you know, I'm only doing this because you can take my control from the Nomu away if you want to with those damn bubbles of yours. And it'd be best if you kept that in mind. Now shoo. I have my own business to attend to. Izuku turns to face the Nomu as Tamura leaves. Where it once stood, its hideous form remains, merely waiting for commands. Izuku makes the decision to give it some. Stand guard. Don't let any students near this location. Do whatever it takes to ensure that this condition, which as of this moment is deemed Condition 1, is met, just so long as you do not deliver any mortal wounds. Battlefield command will default to Tamura after Alpha Target enters the scene, but Condition 1 will still remain in effect. Izuku is aware of the orders, but the Nomu don't appear to understand them. Having dealt with that, he looks back at Eraserhead, who is lying shattered on the ground from the Nomu's attack and volley. The fact that the hero is staring directly at him with unrestrained rage doesn't surprise him in the least. Izuku squats down to Eraserhead's level, taking his time. Please don't get the wrong impression here, Eraser. I mean, I know what this looks like. Me stampeding in here alongside a plethora of villains proclaiming to bring about All Might's end. Don't get me wrong, I have a grudge against the so-called symbol of peace. But that doesn't mean that I want him dead, you know? He says, maintaining a light but mixed artificial voice as he starts the conversation with the man. There's no answer from Eraserhead. He just keeps staring up at Izuku. Izuku is happy to join in the quiet, but the moment is cut short when he notices a figure moving quickly toward him. Ah! And the man of the hour arrives. Guess we'll have to see just how well he's able to hold up against the Nomu, EH. In a cloud of smoke and a crash of metal, the USJ's doors flew open. None other than All Might emerges from the haze, his trademark frown gone. Tamura halts his activity and jerks his head in the direction of the complex's entrance. He can devote all of his attention to his actual target because he has already defeated Jiru and Asui, and Mineta has been out of commission since his earlier ball barrage. Finally, exclaims Tamura, tossing Asui's unconscious body aside, Nomu. Eraserhead and Izuku speed away, leaving the Nomu towering in their wake. However, Izuku is completely unconcerned about such a factor and just keeps talking to the underground hero who is being held captive. Crusty hands over there, Izuku says, pointing to Tamura, is a wildcard, sure. But I mostly understand his intentions and what makes him tick, by now. He'll listen to me, albeit begrudgingly, as long as it secures the means to prove himself to Sensei. And frankly, his control over the Nomu plays a huge role in that. If it eases your worries, I'll tell you that he doesn't stand a chance in succeeding in his goal today. Don't tell him that I said that, though. Izuku laughs and raises a finger in a conspiratorial gesture to the area behind his mask where his lips would be. Now, I'm sure that you're wondering about all sorts of things. And yes, monologuing is quite a forte of mine. So no, I'm not oblivious to the happenings around us. Among these incidents is a full-scale fight between All Might and the Nomu that is dangerously near to their location. Even though the fight might endanger his safety, Izuku is not bothered by it and is happy to remain in his current location. I'm not crazy, you know, even if my mental stability may be something to question. No, I have plans in mind. Plans bigger than Tamura's childish and foolish whims that I need to entertain if I want to keep myself on his good side. When you no doubt come around to interrogating all the mooks you'll capture by the end of the day, you'll find that I played quite a small part in this whole operation. In fact, the only other thing I've done since coming here other than talk to you is talk to a certain individual from your class. I'm sure you know the one. Blonde, bad-tempered, quite a bit of a bastard. Eraserhead knows exactly who Izuku is referring to if the brief silence he displays is any indication. Eraserhead, for his part, narrows his eyes and speaks for the first time. What did you do to my student, villain? Izuku smiles. Nothing that he doesn't deserve tenfold. If anything, I went easy on him today. Even though Izuku can easily sense the hero's cold rage, it only makes him more admirable. Know that I don't do things unless I find them justified, Eraser. You might not agree with my philosophy. Heck, I don't expect a sheltered hero like you to at all, but know that I will only work within the confines of my ideology. I don't hurt those that don't deserve it. But barring that, I plan to do whatever it takes to ruffle up society from its core and reveal the harsh reality of our society to the masses. Eraserhead snarls. You claim that you're not aligned with these villains. You claim that you desire the betterment of society. But from how I see it, you're just a disturbed child, led astray from what it means to be a decent human being. Justice can't be served through violent bodily punishment. It can't be gained through violent and revolutionary means. Please. The underground hero is telling me to work within the system? That's quite hypocritical of you, Eraser. You know as well as I do that some things just can't be done within the rules of society. Especially when it's those very rules that are the root of the problem. Not that you would understand that, though. At last, Izuku gets to his feet. People fall through the cracks, Eraser. Some people will never reach their dreams because of the harsh realities of the world. No matter how much we try, people like myself just can't compete with the bigoted expectations implanted in our minds since our youth. It's unfortunate that this is our reality, especially when the government does nothing to circumvent it, and especially when it only fuels all the tragedy and loss that we experience to this day. What happened to your friend Shirakumo is a glaring example of that. The mention of Shirakumo makes Eraserhead's glare even more intense. The hero needs a moment to collect himself. Almost gritting his teeth, he asks, "Why are you even here?" Izuku laughs. That's easy, to make a statement, of course. To Bakugo, to yourself, and to the world. I want people to know that the outcasts of society are still here, and that it's time that we all do something about our situation. That is all I wish to broadcast at this very moment. Nothing more, and nothing less. Eraserhead interrupts Izuku's quirk by using that moment to activate his own. HMPH, Izuku says, his genuine voice piercing his mask. Still fighting to the end, I see. I must implore you to stop, though. Using your quirk in your state won't do any good for you. You should save your energy for the trip to the hospital instead. I promise that I won't kill any of your students. Surely by now you can trust my word, A burst of dust and air flies through the air, just missing the location where Eraserhead and Izuku are now speaking. Izuku turns to face the source, watching the conflict between the vat-grown creature created to oppose him and the symbol of peace. He suppresses a laugh as he notices Tamura's furious expression from the side, which is undoubtedly caused by the fact that the fight is still ongoing even after the doctor and Sensei have assured him that All Might has been weakened. It's unlikely that Sensei's little jab that the Nomu could defeat All Might in an arm wrestling match has also helped. Izuku pauses to reflect on the previous hour. He hears the different Class 1A students fighting to the best of their abilities against the villain threat all around him, save for a few people who are cowering. Izuku would definitely not want to encounter the students' fierce fighting spirit unprepared. Nevertheless, he feels a sense of relief when he sees his plan, which called for Kurogiri to send the students to the areas where they would have the fewest issues, succeed. In the landslide zone, Kaminari is continuing his ruse by pretending to be Tesla's hostage while the silent Koda and the Yayorozu girl watch helplessly but unfazed, still devising strategies to rescue their friend from danger. It's exactly what Izuku had anticipated from UA's group of hero pupils. Particularly considering what's going to occur in this particular case. A sudden gust of air, very different from that of the Nomu or All Might, bursts up behind Izuku, but he doesn't flinch. Additionally, he does not shred a single worry as the wind carries Eraserhead away in a violent wind shear that is unusually gentle. When he had heard Todoroki and his friend Inasa encroaching on his position, he had long anticipated the move. Normally, he would be concerned. In most cases, a situation where two powerful students converge on his position without any backup would spell his doom. However, if one of the opponents is someone he knows. Watching Inasa fly off back to the USJ entrance with the injured Eraserhead in tow, Izuku smirks to himself. The boy certainly didn't want to abandon Todoroki to his own devices, but considering Eraserhead's current situation, went straight to my hands. Todoroki stands a fair distance away, his eyes narrowed and bewildered as he looks at Izuku. Izuku doesn't blame the boy because his stance and unsteadiness show the hesitation in his mind. The scene before him would shout, "Villain!" if he were in Todoroki's position. Izuku displays his intentions to prevent the need for violence by crossing his arms. Though he doesn't completely lower his guard, Todoroki appears to understand and softens his posture. Todoroki is the first to speak and asks, "What are you doing here?" "I'm sending a message to the world, Todoroki. I don't need to explain to you why. You know all the details already, after all." Todoroki scowls. "But like this," Izuku's head tilts forward. "You remember what I told you last time we saw one other, don't you?" Slowly, Todoroki nods. "Good. Then you'll understand when at the end of the day, the only student you'll find has been injured is a certain explosion-inclined individual. I'm sure that you don't need further explaining as to who I mean." Izuku lets out a sigh. "Don't act all surprised now, Todoroki. You've had speculations of my revolutionary-inclined mindset since the first week we first actually started talking to one another. You knew what you were getting into when you asked for my help. It's not my fault that your hatred for your father muddled your senses as to my nature." Todoroki asks doubtfully, "So you're doing all of this, to incite change? So people don't experience the same things we have?" Izuku nods and says, "You've got it. Though, now that you've got that done, the question is, what do you plan on doing with this information?" Todoroki sighs. "I won't say anything, for now." "Don't act as if you're making a deal with the devil," Izuku says. "I'm not holding blackmail over you, nor vice versa. We're friends, sure, but I fully expect you to spill everything you know about me once I turn into some homicidal maniac who targets the innocents for shits and giggles." Izuku uses his quirk to call out for Kurogiri, and shortly after, a portal appears beside his position. Since his work is done here, this one is expected to return him to the bar in accordance with the predetermined plan. He doesn't have to remain to witness Tamura's loss. Keep that sense of justice ingrained in your mind, Todoroki. You don't need to head down the path that I'm on. I'm already traveling down it for both our sakes, after all. But Izuku shifts his attention to Todoroki before leaving. "As for your cover story as to why you simply talked to me rather than tried to beat me into submission, just say that I tried to make you switch sides because of your father and all that. I'm sure that the teachers will be inclined to believe that." Todoroki hums to himself. "And the reason that I let you get away? Emotional and mental shock, of course." Todoroki laughs at the idea and scoffs. Izuku gives one final message to Todoroki before proceeding to enter the portal. "Do me a favor and keep an eye out for Ibara for me, would you?" The vigilante-turned-villain whisper then disappears from the USJ battlefield. "Ah, Izuku. What a surprise. I suppose that you left Tamura to his own devices before the true climax came to fruition, then? Izuku blinked. Once more, he finds himself in front of the underworld's criminal mastermind in the center of Sensei's throne room. After all, he had asked Kurogiri to send him back to the bar, so this isn't exactly where he had in mind when he left USJ. Although Izuku doesn't exactly harbor animosity toward Kurogiri, it is likely that Sensei is solely to blame for this encounter. After all, Sensei's directives to Kurogiri would have taken precedence over his own. Izuku answers, I did, wearing a mask of composure. I hope that my doing so isn't a problem? Sensei tilts his head in reply, of course not. And besides, I'm sure that you've come to the same conclusion as I have. We both know that you sticking around any longer would be a waste of time, and perhaps even risk unnecessary injury. Sensei crosses one leg over the other and smiles. Though, I suppose that I should ask. Was everything to your liking? Izuku just gives a nod. It was. Sensei hums. He is aware that there is much more to Izuku's straightforward response. But Izuku pauses to gather his thoughts, not totally shocked that Sensei had figured him out. I was observing the battle before I left. By the rate of the things that were happening, I wouldn't be surprised if we've already lost the Nomu to enemy hands. Sensei laughs. And the Nomu are replaceable. Losing one is no loss, and it's not like the heroes would even try to attempt to recreate Kyudai's work. It'd be immoral, after all. He laughs as he says that. I know that, says Izuku. And that's precisely the point. The Nomu are replaceable. That's the problem. Sensei furrows his brow. He leans forward and asks, oh, and what of it then, Izuku? The group needs members, actual members, suggests Izuku. Not some artificially grown minions created in an underground lab, but people with their own personalities and aspirations. Just Tamura, Kurogiri, and I aren't enough. Not if we actually want to make an impact. We need people to take the charge against society. People need to see other people like them working for change if they are to believe what we're fighting for. The public won't stand for a group of revolutionaries built entirely out of hideous, inhuman monsters. Sensei reflects, an interesting perspective on things, but are you forgetting the fact that you're growing one of those hideous, inhuman monsters yourself? True, you're technically still in the planning stages, but all things considered. That's besides the point. Sensei chuckles, as I'm sure it is. Izuku sighs. Point being, we need people. Our attack on the USJ shows that. What good are we if all we have to rely on are near useless mercenaries and unthinking minions that don't have what it takes to act when the situation calls for it? Every organization has its people, and if we want to grow further than where we already are, then we need to start recruiting. I suppose that your words do bring up a valid point, Sensei remarks casually. But if that's how you really feel, what are you going to do about it, then? Are you asking me for help? Izuku gives a headshake. No, Izuku responds, adding that he would prefer not to have any more debt to his mentor than he already has. In fact, I was planning on asking Jiren, as well as go off on my own for my own bout of recruiting. However, it would take a few days for Izuku to have access to the info broker. Since the man is currently out in Hokkaido taking care of some matters, Izuku was unable to corner Jiren without simultaneously interfering with some of his delicate business. Sensei brushes the matter aside, saying, glad that we have that settled. Sensei suddenly pulls out a manila folder and says, now then. As for the real reason I had Kurogiri bring you here. Probably a hammerspace quirk of some kind, Izuku thinks. He looks at the folder for a moment, wondering what might be in it. Though he can only think of a few possibilities, he concludes that there is only one that is most likely to be the cause. Izuku asks, are those what I think they are? Sensei gives a nod. I decided to do you a favor. Think of it as a reward for your hard work and willingness to branch out. That being said, you'll be glad to hear that my sources have finally poked through hard enough into the wretches of the populace. I found another individual that fits the specifications for your little pet project. The folder vanishes with a gesture, then immediately resurfaces in front of Izuku, floating up and down and emitting a puff of smoke. Izuku grabs the folder and starts looking through its contents, ignoring the showmanship, and putting his suspicions about such a blatant gift to rest for later. I must admit, says Sensei, you have some rather interesting ideas in that head of yours. At the very least, definitely filled with things to stretch Kyudai's avenues in ways he hasn't much considered before, that's for sure. Izuku closes the folder and gives himself a nod. He mentally notes that he should later upload his newly acquired knowledge to his laptop. The man on the throne then catches his attention. May I go now, Sensei? Most people would think that Izuku was asking for permission to leave. However, Sensei is different from most people. The situation's context makes it clear that Izuku is talking about the folder's contents, which are currently nestled tenderly between his arms. A huge smile appears on Sensei's scarred face. So soon already? Izuku gives a shrug. There's work to be done. And besides, I'd rather be gone before Tamura gets back and has his little tantrum. Wonderful of you. Sensei laughs. That being said, you wish to head out? Then if you really must, go right ahead, Izuku. Though I at the very least recommend some recuperation first. Izuku tilts his head in the direction of his mentor and says, I'll think about it. Mind calling Kurogiri for me? Resting on his throne, Sensei leans back. You've turned rather lax around me, you know. Izuku gives a shrug. It's what you wanted for a long while now, right? You're not wrong. Though most would think twice about acting so flippantly around me of all people. But you? He chuckles. Till next time, Izuku. Izuku looks at the slowly expanding portal in front of him. His facade of indifference appears to be unaffected and on guard. In his mind, he's getting ready for his next move. Doing this all in one day will be preferable to taking the chance of waiting until tomorrow to take action. Work before my conscience has a chance to fully comprehend what I've done and while the wound is still fresh. Correct. That. Izuku inhales deeply. He enters the portal. Hushed. I'm coming.
So that's it for today. I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.